Chapter 1054. The following tour was also an eye-opener for everyone. Guangzhou Literature Network. The most central location of this new city was the palace. Outside the square surrounding the palace were the residences of some of the court officials, and further out were the various ministries and departments. Everyone went straight to the east of the city and finally saw what the unfinished construction looked like. Countless tractors and trucks were coming and going on the wide road. A few buildings that were still under construction had huge stone and wooden shelves that hung materials from above. The crowd was scattered everywhere like ants. This scene was so spectacular that even Renbaqian was a little dazed. It looked very much like a modern construction site. Especially those tractors and trucks that were driving on the road. However, modern construction sites weren't so huge. Even Wuji City wasn't considered much compared to this city. More than 100,000 people were used to build this city. What's the name of this city? The capital. Renbaqian replied faintly. The other cities that were called the capital were just nicknames. However, this place was different. The name was given by the Empress, and it was called the capital. It was the residence of the emperor and the capital of the entire human race. When she said this name, the Empress was arrogant and looked down on the world. He had to admit that he liked this domineering attitude of the Empress. Every time he saw her like this, his heart would jump a few times. It was only interesting to have sex with such a woman. Then, he would be carried out 7 days later. However, the name, the capital, was indeed domineering. Even the deans of the various academies were shocked. Renbaqian stood in the middle of the road, pointed to the magnificent city in front of him, and said to everyone behind him, "This world has changed." These words made everyone's heart jump again, and they secretly wondered what Zhao Prince Consort meant by saying this. The world has changed, and it's changing faster and faster. If you can't keep up with the changes in this world, you will be eliminated. Renbaqian ignored everyone and just looked ahead. The first to be eliminated were those who couldn't accept new things. Just like on Earth a few decades ago, many people use smartphones, got used to mobile payments, and used to doing everything with their phones. However, many people didn't even know how to use a smartphone. These people were generally elderly. They were gradually falling behind the times. In the decades that followed, the process repeated itself. Cultivation techniques, thinking feedback technology, and all kinds of new technologies were constantly making batch after batch of people unable to keep up with the changes of the times. It would be the same in this world. After sighing, Renbaqian turned around and smiled at the people behind him. Do you know? If he wanted to take down Great Xia, he could do it at any time. It's just that it's not necessary. Zhao Prince Consort is right. Even when Great Xia was at its peak, it wouldn't have been able to resist Dao's army. Furthermore, Great Xia has been through many years of war, the people are suffering, and the national strength is declining, someone immediately said. However, most of these deans still had some integrity and wouldn't flatter him too much. As for what he was thinking, it was hard to say. After all, everyone knew that the Aboriginals didn't have enough officials. The Aboriginals had a small population and few talents. Renbaqian didn't care what they thought. Back then, the Palace of Heaven wanted to wrap up Great Xia and give it to him. Great Xia, which was regarded as the #1 country in the eyes of others, was more of a burden to him. Do you know why I invited all of you here? Renbaqian always changed the topic after one sentence, which made everyone a little uncomfortable. Everyone felt that Zhao Prince Consort was hinting at something. As for what the hint was, they had to go back and think about it themselves. However, this question wasn't difficult at the moment. I'm just guessing, but I don't know if it's accurate. Someone said. Tell me about it. Renbaqian turned around and looked at everyone with a smile on his face. The Palace of Heaven wants to give these young people a chance. That person continued. Ren Baqian laughed. These words were indeed pleasing to the ear. That's right. Give them a chance, and give you a chance too. Everyone was slightly stunned. Giving those students a chance was something that everyone understood. However, what did it mean to give them a chance? When you go back, add a literacy course to all of your academies. You will pass down Dayo's simplified Chinese. In the future, most of the books will be written in simplified Chinese. If you can't read and understand books, I'm afraid that it won't be long before you are eliminated from this world. Ren Baqian's words made everyone silent. One had to know that the written language wasn't just a carrier for recording, carrying knowledge, and exchanging ideas. It was also the historical heritage of a nation. Did Zhao Prince Consort actually mean that he wanted to change the written language? Your Highness, you can't do that. Even if the dean didn't want to say anything, he had to stop him at this time. Why not? Ren Baqian narrowed his eyes, looked at everyone, and said without waiting for them to speak, is there a need for two languages in a country? Unifying the written language in weights is something that must be done. His tone was stern and didn't allow anyone to refuse. In the future, simplified Chinese will be the official language. Newspapers will be in simplified Chinese, and all kinds of official documents will be in simplified Chinese. All kinds of books will also be in simplified Chinese. Physics, chemistry, mathematics, politics, economics, law, manufacturing, agriculture, and everything else will be in simplified Chinese if they don't understand it. What's the difference between the students you teach and the commoners who haven't gone to school? Ren Baqian's words made everyone's faces turn pale. Then, he softened his tone and said, if you are willing to keep the original written language, that's fine. However, simplified Chinese is more conducive to learning and dissemination, so it must be implemented. After that, Ren Baqian didn't say anything else and let everyone think for themselves about what was important. After thinking for a while, he added, in the future, the national exam will also be in simplified Chinese. Everyone was in a mess, but they still perked up after hearing this. Zhao Prince Consort mentioned the national exam. Could it be that he was going to hold the national exam? The Yun nation had been gone for 6.5 years. During these 6.5 years, the students of the academy didn't have any way to advance and could only work for the Chamber of Commerce or be an advisor to some officials. However, it would be different if the national exam was held. They could enter the imperial court and become officials. In about 2 or 3 years, the national exam will be held again. After that, the imperial court will issue a document. Furthermore, it's not limited to men or women. Even women can participate as long as they are knowledgeable enough, Ren Baqian said. The last sentence was specially said to the dean of Jitai Academy. As for Jitai Academy, he was still rather optimistic about it. After returning to Lon City that day, many students heard the news that the national exam was about to be held again and were very excited. In any case, as long as the national exam was held, they would have a chance. Otherwise, no matter how knowledgeable they were, they wouldn't be able to advance. In particular, the many women of Jitai Academy were excited when they heard the news. Other than in the palace, there were no precedents of female officials in the Yun nation. Even if they were successful in their studies, they would only be able to manage their family's business after they got married. However, Zhao Prince Consort's words gave them hope. Furthermore, they weren't worried that Zhao Prince Consort's words were false. In Dayo's imperial court, it wasn't uncommon for women to become officials. In fact, there were even women who became generals. As for learning simplified Chinese, they didn't have as big of a reaction as the dean. Many people were also very interested in the strange things in Black Bamboo Academy. Chapter 1055. You are the pride of your respective academies and have left a good impression on me over the past few days. I want to ask if you are willing to work for the imperial court. Renbochin sat on a chair at the top of the hall and looked down at the crowd. There were a total of 33 people standing below, all of whom had performed well in the previous exams and lectures. Of course, there were more than a few of these talents among the hundreds of people, but they should be the most outstanding batch. Although there were still some who were overlooked, Renbochin didn't have much energy to filter them out. This student is willing. Everyone's faces lit up with joy, and they answered without hesitation. If they weren't willing, they wouldn't have appeared here. They weren't idiots from Wangjing Academy who had studied too much. There were several ways to become an official in this era. The first way was to take part in the major examination, which hadn't been held for 6.5 years. Although Zhao Prince Consort said that there would be a major examination, there were still 2 to 3 years left. Moreover, the major examination didn't mean that there wouldn't be any talents. Therefore, there were 2 other ways, recommendation and guidance. Recommendation was from the bottom up. Of course, this method also required a certain level of authority, at least officials or celebrities. Guidance was from the top down. However, during this period, there was no way to pass the major examination and no way to recommend. After all, the Aboriginals didn't care about celebrities, and the warlords didn't have any intention of recommending them. Renbochin's guidance was their only chance. According to the usual practice, people who were promoted usually had a tag on them. They were promoted by Zhao Prince Consort, so they were naturally labeled as his subordinates. It could be said that in Dao, besides the Empress, this was the thickest thigh. Renbochin nodded. He wasn't surprised that these students were sensible. It would be strange if they refused. Go back and learn simplified Chinese first. If you want to work in the imperial court in the future, you won't be able to do so. Renbochin laughed. Yes. Renbochin met these students and allowed them to wander around Lon City for 2 days before letting them return to the Yun Nation. Learning Chinese wasn't something that could be done overnight and would take at least half a year. After that, these 30 people would be scattered to places that needed manpower, but it would only be a drop in the bucket. After annexing the Yun Nation, there had been a shortage of officials. Many new departments, such as the Department of Commerce, had been severely understaffed for several years. When the people of the Yun Nation left, 2 young women arrived at Lon City on a train. This thing is really interesting. Furthermore, it's so stable. It's much more comfortable than a horse carriage. One of the women exclaimed. Sitting in front of her was a woman in Daoist robes. She was holding a thermos cup with scented tea in it, looking like she was in good health. These 2 people were naturally Lin Yu and Li Yuanzhu. Among them, Li Yuanzhu was already in her 30s, and Lin Yu was even older. Lin Yu and Lin Yu and Lin Yu. With their strength, they would be able to maintain this appearance for at least a few decades. Li Yuanzhu ignored Lin Yu. She held her thermos flask and took sips from time to time. Lin Yun Yun and said they would like to drink. Not only did he buy a thermos cup, but he also bought an aluminum container, toothbrush, toothpaste, soap, sunglasses. When Renbochin heard that an old friend had come to see him, he was a little curious. When he saw the 2 of them, he laughed and said, "So it's you, Zhenrenli. It's been several years since we last met, but the 2 of you are still as elegant as ever. How have you been, Zhao Prince Consort?" She had a faint smile on her face. Renbochin smiled as he welcomed the 2 of them in and asked someone to serve them tea. Then, he asked about the purpose of her visit and said, "Zhenrenli has been busy with Great Xiao's society recently. I often hear about your elegant demeanor, but I haven't had the chance to meet you. How did you find the time to meet an old friend?" "I came here to meet an old friend and to hear your Highness's opinion on the painting screen Sword House, the Pillheart sect, the Guiyuanfang boat, and the other sections." Li Yuanzhu didn't beat around the bush and went straight to the point. He already knew about the screen painting tower, the Pillheart sect, and the other sects, as well as the group of experts. Adding all these people together, there were more than 20 people on the ranking list. There were also disciples from several sects, adding up to a few thousand people. Now, they were the second strongest force after the Return Home organization. Currently, there were no neutral experts in the Jianghu of Great Xia. They had either joined the Go Home organization or formed an alliance with sects like the Painted Screen Sword Tower. Jinrenli and the other experts have already become the general trend. They are just like mantises trying to stop a chariot. Ren Baqian said faintly. Li Yuanzhu put down the tea and said softly, with so many people, there will definitely be casualties if we fight. Even if we destroy the Painting Screen Sword Tower, the casualties will be irreversible. Besides, if these people can join the organization, they will also be new blood. Jinren is thinking about them, but they might not be thinking about you. Ren Baqian laughed. When he saw Li Yuanzhu previously, he had already guessed her intentions. Now, it seemed that it was just as he had guessed. They are the foundation of the human race. Li Yuanzhu said. There are hundreds of millions of people in the human race, and there will always be geniuses. Back then, Su Wuming killed a large number of experts, but experts like Jinrenli, Zi Xiao, Lin Dong, and Ting Yu appeared. The human race doesn't lack geniuses, but geniuses lack opportunities. Ren Baqian's words hit the nail on the head. The human race lacked geniuses. Were the geniuses of the human race limited to these people on the ranking list? Who knew how many geniuses were buried in the wilderness? As for those people, since they had chosen to be enemies, what could they do even if they were strong? Li Yuanzhu was silent. What Ren Baqian said was right, but since these people had come this far, they must have had both talent and opportunity. How difficult was it? It would be a pity if all of them died. Ren Baqian smiled and sighed. However, since Jinrenli is here, I will give them a chance. Li Yuanzhu looked up at him and asked, what did Xiao Prince Consort say? They are all here now, right? I will get someone to set off fireworks for them later. If they are still stubborn, we will plant mushrooms on their heads. Li Yuanzhu pondered over the meaning of Ren Baqian's words and didn't quite understand. After thinking for a while, she found some clues and smiled. That's good too. In any case, she had fought for a chance for them. In addition, I am also very interested in the current princess. I have never heard of someone who was an earth will expert at birth. That's easy. Lu Hua's talent had not only spread throughout Dayou but also reached the ears of many experts in Great Xia. Li Yuanzhu wasn't the only one who was interested. There is one more thing. Recently, an ancient tomb was discovered. It should have been left behind from that period. I wonder if Xiao Prince Consort is interested. Li Yuanzhu's last matter finally caught Ren Baqian's attention. An ancient tomb from that period. How could he not be interested? How did you find it? Is there any trouble? Ren Baqian didn't think that Lin Yu was just asking him. If there wasn't any trouble, Li Yuanzhu wouldn't be asking about it. Instead, she would be bringing something from the tomb. At this point, Lin Yu finally woke up from her dream and said, so it's Xiao Prince Consort. Ren Baqian was speechless. Girl, is your brain still not working properly? Baidu search 081 Chinese network yen. Yen. Chapter 1056. The tragedy was that I was still drinking with my wife outside. My wife was fine, I was much better. The Empress's Gigolo Valentine's Day currently typing, please wait a moment. After the content has been updated, please refresh the page to receive the latest update. Chapter 1057. Have you been together for the past 4 years? Ren Baqian raised his eyebrows. It was a pity that he didn't have eyebrows. Yes. Li Yuanzhu's gaze changed slightly. She glanced at Lin Yu and seemed to want to sigh. Can her brain be saved? Ren Baqian asked curiously. It's up to her. Li Yuanzhu lowered her eyelids again and held a thermos flask. Her posture was just short of stuffing some wolfberries into it. Has your brain gone bad from practicing martial arts? Has it gone berserk? Ren Baqian didn't avoid Lin Yu at all and directly asked her about her brain. In any case, she wouldn't be able to react in time. It should be a problem with her martial arts, Li Yuanzhu said. My men didn't find any news about her, which isn't a big deal. After all, we don't have many people in Great Xia. However, with her brain, why did she join in the fun in the first place? Ren Baqian was still a little curious about Lin Yu. He didn't expect Lin Yu to react so quickly this time. She suddenly said, "Your brain isn't working well." This surprised Ren Baqian and asked, how did she come back to her senses so quickly this time? In the end, Lin Yu didn't move again. It's not that her brain isn't working well, but that her consciousness always seems to be wandering. Although she seems to be able to walk, there's nothing wrong with her other than her slow reaction. Li Yuanzhu explained and made an analogy. It's as if her consciousness is often not in her body, and there's a certain delay in the transmission of her emotions and words. As for her body, it's completely controlled by her instincts. Of course, this is just an analogy. The actual situation is more complicated than that. Ren Baqian thought about it carefully. If he were to describe it, it would be like Lin Yu's consciousness was in the United States, but her body was in China. The communication between them was through dial-up, so her reaction was always slow. From time to time, she would even experience disconnection. He looked strangely at Lin Yu, who was deep in thought, and changed the topic to what Li Yuanzhu had just said. What's the specific situation of the ancient tomb that you mentioned just now? The ancient tomb was discovered by Lin Dong. It is said that he found it by following some clues in the ancient books. You know, Reichi's sect has a long history, and many unknown things have been passed down in the sect. The information about this tomb was like this. It was hidden in some ancient books. After Cult Master Lin went back last time, he spent a few years and a lot of manpower to find clues about this tomb from the ancient books. After finding it, sect leader Lin brought people to check it out and confirm the location of the tomb. However, sect master Lin and the rest are blocked outside. Although they know the location, they haven't made any progress in half a year. Lin Dong did not enter. Ren Baqian was a little astonished. One must know that Lin Dong was one of the top 10 experts in the world. Furthermore, there were also many top-notch experts in Reichi's sect. Even though Reichi's sect didn't have a good reputation, it was a famous sect in Great Xia and could mobilize a lot of power. But this kind of power could not even enter an ancient tomb. Li Yuanzhu lowered her eyes and said, I personally went to the tomb after receiving the news. Unfortunately, I also stopped outside the tomb. This time, Ren Baqian was even more astonished. Li Yuanzhu, the second most powerful expert in the world, Lin Dong, the 10th most powerful expert in the world, and a group of experts from Reichi's sect were actually blocked outside the tomb. How did they do it? Even an impenetrable wall couldn't stop this group of experts. What exactly is going on? After entering the range of that ancient tomb, one will encounter an illusion, just like the one in the tomb below the palace. It's difficult to get rid of it, and when one wakes up, one will already be outside the tomb. This is the case no matter how many times one tries. If one is weak and tries a few more times, it will cause damage to one's divine sense. Sect leader Lin and I speculate that one must at least reach the heaven-splitting region in order to pass through that illusion. Ren Baqian raised his eyebrows. The illusion below the tomb in the palace could only be seen the first time one entered. This one was actually different. Fortunately, it was left behind by a senior human, so there wasn't any danger. However, this also showed one thing, the other party hoped that someone could enter, which meant that there was something important inside. Who is the owner of the ancient tomb? Renbochin pondered for a while and asked. It was only the other party's guess that they could enter the heaven-splitting region. It was best to know the identity of the tomb owner and perhaps find another way. He was getting more and more curious about this tomb. Di Kan. Li Yuanzhu looked at Renbochen's eyes when she said this name. Human Emperor. Renbochen raised his voice and looked incredulous. This name made it difficult for him to maintain his original calm. Before the human race was driven here, there were 5 human emperors, each in charge of a region. 4 of them had died in the previous war. It was because of the existence of this human emperor that the foreign races, who could no longer bear the heavy casualties, signed an agreement with the human race and drove them to this land of exile. It could be said that without Di Kan, the human race in this world would have been extinct. However, there was very little information about Di Kan. In the 2 records left behind by the owner of the tomb under the palace, his name was only mentioned slightly. He didn't expect to hear news about Di Kan at this time. He didn't expect Lin Dong to actually find Di Kan's tomb. If Lin Dong's information is correct, it should be this human emperor. The outermost defense of the tomb is so powerful, so it's very likely that it's him. Li Yuanzhu nodded. Renbochin couldn't sit still anymore. He stood up and walked around a few times before looking up and asking, "Do you know what's inside the tomb?" "I don't know." Li Yuanzhu shook her head slightly. Regardless of whether he knew or not, the tomb left behind by the human emperor had to be explored. No matter what was inside, it would be a huge gain. Renbochin naturally understood this. After walking around a few times, he said, "Xunren and Lin Yuan must be tired. Take a rest first. I'll go see Her Majesty." Li Yuanzhu got up and left after telling him the news she brought. Renbochin arranged for her and Lin Yu to rest before hurrying to see the Empress. Li Yuanzhu's target wasn't the Empress, who was only about as strong as her. Her target was Li Fu. Although he hadn't admitted it, everyone thought that he had broken through to the spirit world level and reached the heaven and earth level. Among the human race, he was the only one who had the opportunity to pass through the barrier formed by the illusion. This was probably the purpose of the human emperor setting up this barrier. If someone who was too weak obtained the things and information in the tomb, it would be harmful to the human race. Only those who had reached the lowest level of strength that he recognized could enter the tomb. The Empress was in a side palace hall. All the items in the side palace hall had been moved to the side of the wall. On the ground, rows of wooden rectangular dominoes were arranged densely. The Empress was looking at Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan carefully placing the dominoes at the edge. The 3 of them were playing dominoes. The dominoes were made up of red and white. After they were pushed over, they would form a red background with the word Empress written in white. Renbochin knew this very well because he was the one who drew the blueprint of the dominoes. When he arrived, Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan were squatting on the ground with dominoes in their hands. They were carefully visiting the tomb with sweat dripping down their foreheads. If they accidentally touched one or the dominoes they placed fell over, all their previous efforts would be in vain. Renbochin slowed down and tried not to disturb them. He walked to the Empress's side, gently massaged her shoulders, and softly said, "Li Yuanzhu is here." The Empress raised her eyebrows and asked in a cold voice, "What is she doing here?" She still hadn't let go of the fact that Renbochin had been arrested. "Moreover, why did she come to see you instead of me? Set a small goal first, such as 1 second. Chapter 1058. I'm afraid that Your Majesty doesn't want to see her. Renbochin pinched the Empress's shoulders. Although the strength of his hands didn't affect the Empress much, she still enjoyed their time together. The Empress snorted. She naturally wouldn't think too much about it. If it were someone else, regardless of whether there was hatred or not, given their status, they would have come to see her directly. However, Li Yuanzhu's actions were a little surprising. She went to look for Rinpoche and let him reconcile the resentment she had for her. She was obviously the second most powerful expert in the world, but she put on a low front. This was something that others couldn't do. After all, she was one of the top figures in the world and had a high status even in the martial arts world. Even the imperial court of Great Xia didn't dare to slight her. Speaking of which, I find it a little strange. In Great Xia, the most active person was Blood Sea Demon. However, with the fall of the Tianmen sect, Blood Sea Demon wasn't that interested. Even though he was still a relatively active expert, in the past 2 years, Zhenrenli has been the one who has contributed the most. Ren Baqian said softly. Experts like these all had their own status. Even in the face of such a major event involving the entire human race, it was reasonable to say that the most responsible experts should be the most active. In the end, Li Yuanzhu, who was indifferent and otherworldly, contributed the most. Even Ren Baqian was surprised. It didn't match her image all along. She didn't seek fame or profit, and she had the attitude of, I'm a brick in the revolution and I'll move wherever needed. Ren Baqian even wanted to award her a model worker or a red banner bearer. Ren Baqian chatted with the Empress for a while before telling her the purpose of her visit. The Emperor's tomb. The Empress's expression turned solemn when she heard this term. Everyone understood the meaning and importance of these words. Even the Empress didn't care about Ren Baqian's arrest anymore. We have to go in and retrieve the things inside, the Empress said as she pressed on Ren Baqian's hand. If there were things left behind by Di Ken in the tomb, it would be of great significance to the current human race. That's for sure. Ren Baqian naturally knew that the things had to be retrieved, and he even wanted to go there himself. After all, the things in Di Can's tomb were too important. However, thinking about the matters at hand made him a little troubled. He had too many things on hand, and he couldn't let them go. Although being at the top of a country was the same as being at the top of a company, he couldn't have everything in his hands. However, there were too few aboriginals who could shoulder the burden. If it was a fight, a bunch of burly men would jump out and shout, I want to fight 10 of you. However, in other aspects, they were far too lacking. I'll go personally. The Empress spoke first while he was still mulling over the arrangements at hand. This matter was worthy of her making a personal trip. Ren Baqian thought about it carefully and said, the tomb won't run away even if it's there. It will still take several decades or even a century for us to walk out of this place. There's no rush. Only God knew what was inside the tomb after passing through the barrier. Although it seemed that the arrangement of the human sovereign would not cause much harm to the intruders, it was hard to say after passing through the barrier. Only he could use technological items according to the situation at the scene. However, he couldn't leave now, so he'd better put the matter of the tomb of the human sovereign aside and go there when he was free. Anyway, a year and a half wouldn't make much of a difference. You don't believe me? The Empress grabbed Ren Baqian's collar and pulled him down. Ren Baqian's head fell on the sofa, and his head happened to be on the Empress's lap. He twisted his body like a worm and found a comfortable position. It's not that I don't believe you, but there's no need. Speaking of which, I haven't traveled with your Majesty for a long time. This time, we're going abroad again. Wouldn't it be better for the two of us to travel together? Ren Baqian said while enjoying the Empress's lap pillow. After hearing what Ren Baqian said, the Empress was obviously tempted. If everything could be arranged properly, it wouldn't be a bad idea for the two of them to go sightseeing along the way. Although the tomb of the human sovereign was very important, as he said, it couldn't run away. The Empress thought for a while and said, we still have to bring Yu Qing along. It would be hard to rest along the way if they brought her along. However, if they left her behind, she would turn the palace upside down. At the mention of Lu Hua, Ren Baqin frowned a little. She could never calm down, and he even suspected that she had ADHD. After some discussion, the two of them decided on this matter. Ren Baqin would first busy himself with the matters at hand and find time to go to Great Xia after a few months. Let her come to the banquet tonight, the Empress said lazily. Although he still didn't like Li Yuanzhu, with her status, he had to treat her to a banquet. In addition to Li Yuanzhu, Lin Yu, and Li Fu were also at the banquet. After Ren Baqin told him about the tomb of the human sovereign, Li Fu couldn't sit still and was even more anxious than Ren Baqin and the Empress. However, Ren Baqin made up his mind to go to the tomb a few months later. Li Yuanzhu finally met Qi Yuqing. She was only 3 years old, but she looked like a 7 or 8-year-old child. Her eyes were very lively, and her eyeballs were always rolling around, making her look very clever. The most important thing was her strength. She was at the intermediate level of the earth will level, just like the rumors said. Li Yuanzhu liked her when she saw her. With a flick of her finger, a short wooden sword landed in front of Lu Hua. Lu Hua was a little disgusted and said in a childish voice, "It's too small." This sword was suitable for a 3 or 4-year-old child, but it was too small for her, so she wasn't interested in it. Hold it in your hand and keep it in your heart, Li Yuanzhu said with a smile. Ren Baqin recalled the sword that he had thrown to the laboratory of the Messier 87 department back then. Thank you, Shinren. Ren Baqin immediately said. It's all right. I obtained it by chance these days, and it's of no use to me, Li Yuanzhu said. The Empress was expressionless. She was using her bare hands and wasn't going to let Lu Hua learn swordsmanship. This kind of skillful weapon wasn't suitable for the aboriginals and was just a toy. Lu Hua thought about it and picked up the sword. It grew from 40 centimeters to 90 centimeters in her hand, which was just right for her. Not only did it grow longer, wider, and thicker, but even the hilt became thicker. Lu Hua's eyes were filled with joy, and she immediately fell in love with this new toy. Ren Baqin narrowed his eyes. It was just as he had expected. However, the next moment, the sword in Lu Hua's hand grew several times larger. She had to hold the hilt with both hands, and the sword was more than 4 meters long. Ren Baqin immediately knew that this sword was many times stronger than the one he had obtained in the past. After a discussion with Ren Baqin and the Empress, Li Yuanzhu bade them farewell and left Lan City by train the next day. She was very interested in this new means of transportation. Ren Baqin and Li Yuanzhu agreed to send someone to the Huaping Sword Tower to drop a nuclear bomb 3 months later. If they still refused to come to their senses, the nuclear bomb would be dropped on their heads. As for Ren Baqin himself, he invited many chambers of commerce and families to visit the capital. On one hand, he wanted to sell them houses, but most importantly, he needed these chambers of commerce and families to open shops in the capital to make the capital prosperous. 3 months passed in a flash, and all the chambers of commerce and families in the Yun nation opened new shops in the capital. At the same time, hundreds of villages from the 60,000 mountains, nearly 100,000 aboriginals, 30,000 households from Tianjing Basin, and 150,000 Jing tribe people all moved to the capital. Lan City began to get busy in preparation for the relocation of the capital. It would take 3 months just to move the capital. First, set a small goal, such as 1 second. Chapter 1059. As soon as he returned to the palace, he heard a deafening wail. Doubtlessly, Honeysuckle was beaten up again. Furthermore, the Empress did it personally. It was much more painful than doing it himself. He was already used to such daily occurrences. With Erhua's naughtiness, she would definitely not be wronged if she were to be beaten up 3 times in the morning. Following the sound, she found her way to the Ordnance Palace. It was the palace where Erhua lived. As soon as she stepped outside, she found out why she was beaten. The courtyard was in a mess. All the flowers and trees were chopped off at a height of 1 meter. Broken branches and leaves were everywhere. It was as if a war had taken place here. With a quick glance, all the cuts were very smooth, as if they had been cut by a sharp weapon. When he entered the hall, he saw Erhua lying on one side and sobbing. The wooden sword had shrunk to its smallest size and was thrown aside like a child's toy. Upon hearing Renbachian's footsteps, Erhua raised her head and looked at Renbachian like a kitten. She wanted to complain, but after thinking that her father couldn't defeat the Empress and that it might turn into a mixed-gender fight, she gave up on this idea. The Empress was sitting on Erhua's bed, drinking wine from time to time. From time to time, she would glance at Erhua with a sharp gaze. It was like a scene of domestic violence. "Why are you drinking alcohol?" Renbachian didn't know whether to laugh or cry. It was understandable that she would hit a child while eating, sleeping, and so on. It was understandable that the Empress would beat the child herself. However, it was more interesting to drink while beating a child. "I'm thirsty after fighting for so long." The Empress glared at Lu Hua again. "So what if it's torn down? Whose child doesn't tear down the roof tiles? Furthermore, the capital is going to be moved soon," Renbachian consoled her. Although that was the case, most naughty children had the heart to climb up the roof and tear down the tiles, but they didn't have the strength. Lu Hua not only had the heart, but he also had the strength. "Not only did she demolish Ordnance Palace, but she also chopped down my tree," the Empress said gloomily. "Which tree?" "Candy tree." Even though the candy tree was empty most of the time, the Empress still planted it in front of the palace hall. Even after changing palaces several times, the candy tree was still the same. When Renbachian had the time, he would also hang candies on the candy tree. Every time, the Empress would think of the time before they got married. Then, she would take a pair of scissors and cut off all the candies. This was a bit of fun between the two of them, especially since Renbachian was getting busier and busier recently. "Your Majesty, why don't you wait for my return before we discuss this?" Renbachian felt a little regretful. "Why would I wait for you to come back?" The Empress rolled her eyes. "Let's beat her together. Now that you're done, I can't do it." Immediately, Erhua stopped crying. She raised her head and looked at Renbachian with grief and indignation. "Are you two biological parents? I want to leave home. I want to leave home. Never to see father and mother Empress again. The outside world is so big, I want to see it too. I'll come back when you know you're wrong." Erhua rolled his eyes and made up his mind to run away from home. He was thinking about what he should do. Although he was only a 3-year-old child, he was usually more mischievous than a naughty child and lacked common sense, but his mind was still quite full of ideas. Naturally, the two of them didn't know what she was planning. Seeing her eyes rolling, they knew what she was planning. "After the capital is moved, let her attend cultural classes," Renbachian said to the Empress. The kindergarten on Earth had already been set up, but he had too many things to do recently. He decided to send her there only after the capital was moved. At the same time, the palace would arrange for teachers to teach her. After that, there would be a kindergarten for the children of the court officials. Renbachian planned to let her attend 3 classes. 14 days of school in a week. It was too cruel for a 3-year-old child. It was better to let her attend 13 days of school. The Empress also felt that it was time for her to learn something, so she nodded in agreement. Afterward, the two of them discussed the relocation of the capital as they walked. Many things had already begun to be prepared. For example, the Aboriginals and the 100,000 Jing tribe people who had moved out of the 60,000 mountains were gradually moving to the capital. After the two of them left, Erhua got up quickly. There were no longer any tears in her eyes, but they were still a little red. Over the past few years, two flowers had not mastered anything else but the ability to cry at the drop of a hat. Where should I run away from home? I definitely can't do it in this city. If I'm discovered, they will inform Father and Mother Empress. Those people aren't reliable at all. Erhua thought to herself. Although she was only 3 years old, she wasn't stupid. Her intelligence was at least equivalent to that of a 7- or 8-year-old child. It was just that she was inexperienced and didn't understand many things. However, with her pitiful little experience, she quickly found a feasible way. The steam train. As long as she sat on it, she would be able to run very far away. Furthermore, she still remembered the way. After recalling the way to take the steam train, Erhua sat there thoughtfully and began to think about what to bring with her when she ran away from home. Those air-dried rats and birds, as well as sweets and honey. Erhua's mind was filled with food. As for money, she still didn't have any concept of it. In any case, others would treat her to meals and drinks. After knowing where to go and what to bring, she had to consider when to leave and how to knock Zhu Hua out. From the perspective of a 3-year-old or even a 7- or 8-year-old child, Erhua was already very thorough. Although she was beaten up every day, who asked her to be so mischievous? Most of the time, she simply didn't care if she would be beaten up for what she was about to do. After making up her mind, Erhua prepared a small bag for the next 2 days. In fact, it was the stomach of a type of strange beast. When it was shrunk, it could be placed in one sleeve and could expand very much after storing things. When Zhu Hua wasn't paying attention, Erhua stuffed the bag with her snacks and sweets and then tied it up and hid it. On the 3rd night, Honeysuckle smashed a metal vase on the back of Zhu Hua's head when she wasn't paying attention. The vase was dented, and Zhu Hua fainted. She didn't expect to fall into Honeysuckle's trap again and be defeated by Honeysuckle. Then, Erhua hung her wooden sword on her waist, carried the bag, and sneaked out of the palace. After being in the palace for so long, she was already very clear about the routes and timings of the Imperial Guards. As long as she had the intention, it wasn't difficult at all. After sneaking out of the palace, Erhua was immediately in a good mood and felt that she could fly freely in the vast sky. The next step was to take a train. This wasn't too difficult for her. With her skills, she could even sneak out of the palace, so sneaking out of Lawn City was even easier. After finding the right direction, she left the city and followed the cement road to find the train station. Then, she found a train and sneaked onto it. Nowadays, there weren't many trains from Lawn City to the Yun Nation. There were only 6 trains a day, 1 in the morning, 1 in the afternoon, and 1 in the evening. This train happened to leave the next morning. In the morning, someone discovered that Zhu Hua had been knocked out and that the little princess had disappeared. Suddenly, the entire palace was in an uproar, and the entire Lawn City was searched. At this time, no one expected that Erhua had already boarded a train to the Yun Nation. First, set a small target, such as 1 second. Remember, bookseller's residence. Chapter 1060. I won't explain any further. Tonight, the updates will resume as per normal. 2 chapters as a foundation, 3 chapters later. The pretty boy of the Empress's family will resume updating tonight. Currently typing, please wait a moment. After the content has been updated, please refresh the page to receive the latest update. Chapter 1061. Lawn City, the Palace. Ren Baqian's face was very ugly. He thought that Hua Er had gone out to play again. This wasn't the first time this had happened, so he wasn't too worried. Even after Zhu Hua woke up and found out that she had been knocked out in the middle of the night, he still felt the same. However, after searching Lawn City for 4 hours without finding any trace of Hua-er, his face began to turn ugly. Not only were the palace guards mobilized, but the Public Order Bureau and the Department of Inspection were also mobilized. Under such circumstances, Hua-er was nowhere to be found after 4 hours, which could only mean one thing: she was no longer in Lawn City. He glanced at Zhu Hua, who still looked like a retard. That metal vase weighed 30 to 40 kilograms, and Hua-er didn't know how to control her strength and almost smashed her into an idiot. It seemed like someone else would have to look after Hua-er. Renbaqian rubbed his forehead. The most important thing now was to find Hua-er. There were 3 gates in Lawn City, but Hua-er definitely didn't leave through the city gates since the city walls couldn't stop her. Where would she go? The most likely place was where he had taken her. Mount Zhongsher's laboratory, the imperial capital, and the Yun nation. Given Hua-er's liking for fun, she was most likely heading east. Nowadays, there were 200 to 300 tractors and trucks heading from Lawn City to the Yun nation every day. Hua-er could hide in any of the vehicles and reach the Yun nation. Renbaqian got up to look for the Empress. He needed the Empress's warrant to mobilize the winged cavalry, so he ordered them to search in 4 directions. At the same time, he had to call Zidonglai and ask him to arrange for people to search the Yun nation. To be precise, they had to search Yonggwa, Yujiang, and Pingdu with these 3 cities as the center. The highway would pass through these 3 cities and end in Pingdu. The train also had stations in these 3 cities. At this time, Renbaqian didn't expect Hua-er to sneak onto the train. After all, the train station was located in a remote place outside the city, and Renbaqian felt that it was most likely that she had sneaked into one of the trucks. However, just in case, he still asked someone to contact the people on the train that had already left and search the train. After making these arrangements, Renbaqian had to wait for news in the palace. He was a little worried. Although Hua-er was at the Kismet Heaven level, she hadn't learned any martial arts and was far from being a match for an Earth-level expert. In addition, she had never been outside and could be deceived with just a few words. If she encountered a bad person, she would probably suffer a lot. At this time, Honeysuckle was surrounded by neatly arranged straw sacks. Only the top of his head could see the light. The environment wasn't very good, but she didn't care. Her face was still full of excitement. She grabbed a dried bird from the bag and started to chew on it. Even the bones were crushed and swallowed. Just now, he was hiding in an empty soft sleeper compartment, but someone checked and he was almost discovered. She ran along the roof of the car and finally into this container. The container was filled with bags of sweet potatoes, which filled up more than half of the truck. Hua threw a few bags of sweet potatoes to the side and made a nest. Honeysuckle sat there for a day and a night, stopping a few times in between. Every time, Honeysuckle would stick his head out to look. The next morning, Honeysuckle saw a lot of people getting off the train and walking out. Some people even opened the boxes on the side to move goods down. He was immediately tempted. She didn't know where she wanted to go, so she would go wherever others went. Hua found an opportunity to sneak off the train when no one was paying attention. Then, he followed the crowd and snuck out. However, as soon as he slipped out, he was targeted. Princess. A group of soldiers recognized Honeysuckle at a glance. After all, she was only wearing the same clothes. Furthermore, her figure was special and much more muscular than ordinary people. Even though most of it was covered by the clothes, it could still be seen if one looked carefully. Those who didn't know better might think that she was wearing soft armor underneath, but it couldn't be more obvious in the eyes of those who knew. Honeysuckle looked blankly at the people in front of her and didn't know what they were going to do. "Princess, please come back with us," a captain smiled warmly at Honeysuckle. Unexpectedly, Honeysuckle's expression changed drastically. She punched him in the eye and ran away at an extremely fast speed. Even an ordinary horse couldn't catch up to her, let alone an ordinary soldier. However, her destination was immediately seen by others. It was Yuzheng City. Renbachien received a call from the Protectorate of the Northeast and was relieved to hear that they had found traces of honeysuckle. Where is she now? In Yuzheng City. My men have found traces of her, but they are still following her for fear that she will run away again. Zi Donglai's voice came from the other end of the line. Thank you. Renbachien thought for a while and said, let the experts keep an eye on her. As long as she isn't hurt, I will set off immediately. After hanging up, Renbachien finally felt a little more relaxed. He had finally found that girl. Although he wanted to catch her back, he wasn't in a hurry. It would be fine as long as someone kept an eye on her and didn't let her get hurt. Although he was angry that she ran away without permission, he could rest assured that she was safe now that he had found her. He would take this opportunity to make her suffer a little and learn a lesson. Renbachien headed to the bedroom. At present, the sky above the palace seemed to be covered by dark clouds. Not only was it pressing down on the palace, but it was also pressing down on everyone's hearts. Everyone in the palace didn't even dare to breathe loudly. Renbachien ignored this oppressive atmosphere and walked into the bedroom. He didn't beat around the bush and said, I found her. She's in Yuzheng City. She knew that the Empress was also very worried. She could tell from her aura that was pressing down on the entire palace. Let Zi Donglai catch her back. I will teach her a good lesson, the Empress said through gritted teeth. However, she withdrew the terrifying aura that was pressing down on everyone's hearts. Qin Yuan and Hong Wuan finally felt a little more relaxed. It was very frightening to be around such an empress. There's no hurry. Let her suffer a little outside and suffer a little. I will set off now to bring her back, Renbachien said. After Renbachien finished speaking, he added, even if you come back, don't beat me up anymore. This little girl has her own ideas and might even run away from home again. The Empress snorted and didn't refute him. Punish her with writing essays for a month to hone her temperament, such as the 1,000-character classic, the 3-character classic, and the poems of the Tang and Song dynasties. Go and come back quickly. The Empress waved her hand unhappily. Got it. I will be back soon. Renbachien leaned over and kissed the Empress's red lips. It was slightly cold and soft, and a delicate fragrance assailed his nostrils. At this time, Erhua had already arrived in Yuzheng City. He was excited to see the streets full of pedestrians and unfamiliar shops. He ran and jumped around the streets of Yuzheng City. Erhua carried his bag of snacks. The bag, which was originally as tall as a person, was more than half empty. He couldn't bear to eat it, but he smelled the aroma coming from the restaurant next door and went in without thinking. Young lady, how many people? The child stretched his head and looked behind Erhua. Just me. Erhua found a table by the window and looked expectant. What delicious food and wine do you have here? Bring them all up. The waiter sized her up. She wasn't an ordinary child and wondered which family she was from. However, he didn't pay much attention to her. This kind of young lady who sneaked out to play definitely wasn't here to eat and dash. All right. Set a small goal first, such as 1 second. Remember, booksellers. Chapter 1062. It didn't take long for 3 dishes and 1 soup to be placed in front of Honeysuckle. Although she said that all the delicious dishes would be served, her son wouldn't be so stupid as to do that. Although the amount of food wasn't big enough, it was enough for 2 people, only for ordinary people. There was a plate of fish, half a bird, a plate of ingredients, and a bowl of soup. In addition, there was also a pot of 100-flower wine. Honeysuckle was also hungry. She quickly cleaned half of the table and then burst into tears. This time, not only the people in the restaurant, but even the street was alarmed. Thinking about it, such a beautiful girl was already very attractive, but then she burst into tears in the middle of eating, and her voice was very loud. The shopkeeper and the waiter were sweating profusely. "Little girl, what's wrong? Don't cry first. It hurts." Honeysuckle pointed at her throat. Her eyes were red, and tears fell down. The shopkeeper looked at her. What was going on? Looking at the little girl's clothes and appearance, she definitely wasn't from an ordinary family. If something happened to her in the restaurant, her family wouldn't be able to bear the responsibility. "Go, invite the doctor from Daiji Hall over," the shopkeeper hurriedly said. Daiji Hall was only 3 shops away from this restaurant, so it was very close. Everyone looked at the table as if it had been swept by a gust of wind. How many minutes had it been? Half of the table was empty. Looking at the remaining half of the fish and the little girl's appearance, someone tentatively said, "Little girl, did the fish bone pierce your throat?" Hearing this, many people felt that this was the case. They immediately laughed and said, "Little girl, you haven't eaten fish before." Yujiang City was close to Yujiang and was rich in yuhu fish, so there weren't many people who hadn't eaten fish before. Honeysuckle continued to cry. What was fish? She had never eaten fish before. Although the fish bone wasn't hard, her mouth could withstand it, but her esophagus couldn't and was immediately pierced. The waiter brought a doctor in his 40s. After asking about the situation, the doctor was also a little speechless. He asked Honeysuckle to open her mouth and poked the back of her throat with a chopstick. Honeysuckle felt uncomfortable, and then directly punched the doctor more than a meter away. "Why are you hitting people?" The shopkeeper was shocked. Honeysuckle couldn't care less about what he said. He bent over and began to retch, spitting out everything he had eaten. Even the fish bones were gone. Honeysuckle finally felt a little better. The shop was in chaos. Honeysuckle's punch caused the doctor to spit out a mouthful of blood. Everyone was aghast. The little girl looked to be 7 or 8 years old and looked like a porcelain doll. Her hands were so strong. The waiter and the shopkeeper hurriedly sent the doctor back to the pharmacy. When the shopkeeper returned, he saw that Honeysuckle had already changed a table and was slamming the table at him. "Bring out the good dishes and wine, I don't want the one just now." Honeysuckle felt bad that he had to spit out the food he had just eaten, but he was also scared of the fish. He did not forget to ask the shopkeeper to give him something to eat and drink. The shopkeeper's face darkened. "Little girl, why are you hitting people? He even injured the doctor. In other words, you'll have to pay up." Honeysuckle was at a loss and felt wronged. "He poked me with his chopsticks and made me uncomfortable." "He's treating you. Didn't you get poked by the fish bone? He's helping you get the fish bone out." The shopkeeper looked at Honeysuckle carefully and realized that she did not seem to be pretending. She really did not seem to be very sensible. Looking at her age, it seemed that she had been spoiled since she was young and did not understand these things. Being poked in the back of the throat with chopsticks was a bit of a reaction. Then he sighed. "Forget it. From the looks of it, Dr. Liu needs to rest for a few days. Pay up and I won't report this to the authorities." Honeysuckle continued to be at a loss. She did not understand most of it, but she did understand one thing. She seemed to have injured that person. But she had used so much strength to play with the Roaring Emperor, and the Roaring Emperor was not injured. Good food, good wine. Honeysuckle's heart was most concerned about this matter. Seeing that she was not in a good mood, the shopkeeper did not say much. He thought that it would be enough to let the little girl pay up later. The main thing was that the little girl had injured that person with a punch. It made him realize that the other party was not only from a rich family, but also a martial arts practitioner. He did not want to offend her family. He ordered the food and wine to be served. This time, it was beef, mutton, and mushroom soup. He did not dare to serve her anything with bones. Honeysuckle ate at 6 tables in a row before she finally felt less hungry. Most of the ingredients in the palace were full of vitality. Even the beef and mutton were of the highest quality. 1 kilogram of meat contained the vitality of several kilograms of ordinary meat. Not to mention, there were often earth-will-level beasts as ingredients. Outside, it was completely different. However, Honeysuckle was very happy. She had eaten more delicacies than in the palace. After eating, she sat there and drank jar after jar of wine. After a few jars of wine, the shopkeeper could not sit still anymore. He had been waiting for her family to look for her, but after waiting for the whole afternoon, he saw that she still wanted to drink. He came up and asked, "Little girl, when will your family come to pick you up?" Honeysuckle shook her head. She was most afraid of being found by her father and mother. "May I know which family this young lady is from?" Honeysuckle continued to shake her head. "Then where is your family?" Honeysuckle still shook her head. To put it simply, she did not know anything. The shopkeeper did not know whether she didn't know or didn't want to answer. He guessed that it was the latter. Seeing this, he gritted his teeth and said, "Little girl, you better pay for this meal and the money for injuring Dr. Liu. The medical fee for injuring Dr. Liu is 2 taels of silver. You ate 24 dishes and drank 5 jars of potpourri, which is 4 taels of silver. That's a total of 6 taels of silver." Honeysuckle stared at him with her eyes wide open. "What money?" The shopkeeper also stared at her. The two of them stared at each other. The shopkeeper had a bad idea and asked, "Little girl, do you have money?" Honeysuckle looked at him, then at the hall that was once again full of people. She asked loudly, "Who wants to buy me a drink?" The restaurant suddenly became quiet. Everyone had noticed this earlier. After all, such a little girl drinking alone had aroused many people's curiosity. Hearing this, everyone was a little confused. What did this mean? On the contrary, the shopkeeper's face turned black. He asked in disbelief, "Little girl, do you have money?" Honeysuckle didn't look at him. Instead, she looked at the people in the restaurant with anticipation. Seeing that no one wanted to buy her a drink, Honeysuckle didn't know what was going on. Previously, when she sneaked out of Lawn City, the people in the restaurant all wanted to buy her a drink. With a blank look, Honeysuckle felt that something was wrong. She looked at the shopkeeper and asked, "What is money?" The shopkeeper almost spat out a mouthful of blood. The person in front of him didn't even know what money was. The surrounding people immediately burst into laughter. This little girl was indeed spoiled. She snuck out to have fun and didn't even know what money was. "Shopkeeper, how much money does she owe?" someone suddenly shouted. This person was kind-hearted. He thought that if the money wasn't much, he would pay for it. This little girl looked pretty and interesting. 4 taels of silver. The shopkeeper gestured with his hand. That person immediately lost his voice. 6 taels of silver. How could it be so much? An ordinary person could only earn this much in half a year. "Shopkeeper, are you trying to cheat her of her money?" someone immediately questioned. The shopkeeper had a bitter smile on his face. This person ate the whole afternoon. 5 jars of potpourri and 24 dishes. That's 4 taels of silver. She even injured Dr. Liu from the neighboring Daiji hole. She has to pay 2 taels of silver. This time, everyone was speechless. Ate the whole afternoon. 24 dishes. 5 jars of wine. This little girl was so young. How could she eat so much? The shopkeeper was also speechless. This person in front of him was really speechless. He knew that she snuck out to have fun and that her family wasn't ordinary. If she didn't have much money, it would have been fine. But 6 taels of silver was not a small amount. "Little girl, do you have anything valuable on you? You can mortgage this first and get your family to redeem it later." Without another word, Honeysuckle took the bag that she carried with her and poured it on the table. The shopkeeper originally had some expectations, but when he saw the things that were poured on the table, he was instantly speechless. What were these things? A few dried rats, a few dried birds, a small piece of bacon, a glass jar that looked like honey, a piece of sugar cane, a few fruits. Honeysuckle generously pointed at the things on the table. "Which one do you want?" These things were all his treasures. But since he had eaten her food, he would give her whatever she wanted. The shopkeeper was on the verge of crying. "I don't want any of them." At this time, a few people walked in and realized that the atmosphere in the restaurant wasn't right. They immediately followed the gaze of the crowd. When 2 of them saw Honeysuckle, their eyes instantly lit up. "Shopkeeper, what's going on?" A man with a wretched face and rat eyes shouted. The crowd in the restaurant was originally attracted by Honeysuckle's food. When they noticed the newcomers, their expressions all changed and they looked away. When the shopkeeper turned his head to look at the newcomers, his eyes couldn't help but reveal a look of disgust and fear. Not good. Why did these rats come? He hurriedly waved his hand. Nothing. I think you have something to say. If you have something to say, why don't you tell us? Which family is this little girl from? A young man with a frivolous smile placed his hand on the shopkeeper's shoulder. He looked at Honeysuckle as if he had seen a treasure. First, set a small goal. For example, remember, bookseller's residence. Chapter 1063. The world was complicated, and there were dark corners in every city. Even under the rule of the ancient race, such a situation would occur. In fact, they might even be out of the sight of the ancient race. This was because such a situation had never occurred in the Aboriginals. On one hand, Dayo had only existed for a short period of time. In the past, the Aboriginals lived in mountain villages. On the other hand, the Aboriginals were brave and good at fighting, so there was no soil for such a group to breed. If one dared to say that they were the gang leader of the Red Planet, that they were here to collect protection fees, or that they wanted to bully the innocent, they would be beaten to a pulp by a group of uncles and aunties with knives. The customs and history of the Aboriginals were destined to produce bandits, a profession with a bright future. If the imperial court issued a plundering certificate, the simple people carrying hoes in the village or herding livestock in the wild would turn into the most ferocious bandits and rush into the surrounding countries. The Aboriginals didn't have the underworld, sects, or gutter rats at the bottom of society. However, it was completely different in the Yun Nation. In addition to the sects, there were also people outside the sects, forming another underworld. These 2 underworlds intersected with each other but belonged to completely different existences. For example, the most powerful force in the vicinity of Yujiang City was the empty cicada house. In the eyes of the ordinary people, it was a huge force that was superior to them. In fact, it was considered an upper-middle sect in the Yun Nation. In Yujiang City, there were 3 other forces. They were the Snake Gang, the Boat Gang, and the Freedom Society. These 3 gangs were closely related to the ordinary people, but they were all different. Among them, the Snake Gang was mainly made up of snake catchers, the Boat Gang was made up of people who relied on the water for a living, and the Freedom Society was made up of gutter rats. They bullied the innocent, collected protection fees, stole chickens and dogs, and sold some innocent people to brothels. Almost all the despicable things in Yujiang City had something to do with the Freedom Society. The 4 people who came in were from the Freedom Society. The strongest among them hadn't reached the man-will level and was only slightly stronger than the ordinary people. Coupled with the background of the Freedom Society, it was enough for them to act like tyrants. The young man who patted the shopkeeper's shoulder was called Ping Dun. His nickname was Wild Dog, lecherous, and sinister. "Shopkeeper, what's the matter? Tell us. This little girl is so pretty. Which family is she from? We can't bear to see you make things difficult for her." Wild Dog laughed. As soon as he entered the room, he saw Hua as if he had seen a treasure. It wasn't that he liked Hua, but the leader of the Freedom Society liked this girl very much. Every once in a while, someone would send one to him, but no one else had seen her. He didn't know if she was dead or something. However, there were rumors that he liked to eat children's hearts and brains. If such an exquisite girl was sent to him, he might even be able to advance further. If he couldn't, he could, he. If he could, then it, he. If he couldn't, he would, he world. If he, he, of, he, in of he, of him. Although this little girl seemed to be from a wealthy family, the Freedom Society was able to become one of the 3 major powers in Yujiang City. Naturally, they had their own strength. Their leader was an earth will expert. The ordinary, and, of, was. In, of thou. In of, by, even the, he. The shopkeeper had a conscience. He knew who the other party was and wanted to brush it off. However, Wild Dog's grip became stronger. His fingers seemed to be digging into the shopkeeper's shoulder. Wild Dog's expression became more and more dangerous. With an unbridled smile, he said, "We are kind, but the shopkeeper doesn't know how to appreciate our kindness." The shopkeeper broke out in a cold sweat. He had no choice but to tell Hua what had happened. After that, he felt sorry for Hua. Look at her attire. She's not from an ordinary family. An ordinary family can't give birth to such a child. Maybe the adults in the family will come looking for her, the shopkeeper added. I see. I'm a kind-hearted person. Let me help you. Wild Dog laughed and patted the shopkeeper's shoulder. Little girl, how should I address you? Did you sneak out or did you get separated from your family? It's not easy for the shopkeeper to deal with you eating and dashing. Do you want me to inform your family? Wild Dog was ready to ask about Hua's background and showed a kind smile. Hua didn't like the person in front of her. However, she also knew that she seemed to have done something wrong. She actually needed something called money to eat outside. Hence, when she heard the question, she subconsciously said, Hua. Wild Dog's smile became wider. This was not a name that a big family could give. Although the little girl was dressed well, from the name, even a squire wouldn't give his own child such a name. A nouveau riche who didn't study much. A merchant who came from a bumpkin background and earned some money. It must be her family situation. Your family. Wild Dog's smile became even more kind. Hua shook her head. She wouldn't let her father and mother know that she was here. Wild Dog immediately imagined the scene of her and her father, who came from a bumpkin background, coming to Yujiang City and getting separated. These are brought by you. Wild Dog flipped through the things that Hua poured on the table. His smile became brighter. The dried rats and birds looked like they were for eating. Any family with a bit of status wouldn't let their children touch these things, let alone a girl. Let us accompany you to find your family, okay? As soon as Wild Dog said this, the surrounding people who had lowered their heads since they came in immediately showed a look of pity and worry. Brother, I think her family will be here soon. The shopkeeper had only said one sentence when he was slapped in the face. Shopkeeper, do you not want to keep this shop open, or do you not want to live? A fierce-looking young man whispered in his ear. Immediately, the shopkeeper was so scared that he didn't dare to speak. Why did you hit him? Erhua glared at the young man angrily. She had a good impression of this shopkeeper. You're just a little girl. How can you have money on you? The shopkeeper is asking you for money. This is something you did wrong. If you did something wrong, you have to be punished. Wild Dog laughed lightly. Erhua immediately felt that the person in front of her wasn't bad. She still felt that something was wrong. She mumbled, but I ate. You need to pay for food, but this money should be paid by your family. Shall I bring you to find your family? Wild Dog said. Erhua shook her head. Then what should we do? You ate, but you don't have money to pay, and you're not willing to bring us to find your family. This is very difficult for me. Wild Dog was even happier in his heart, but his expression was very conflicted. Erhua naturally didn't know what to do. Not only do you not have money, but you also have nowhere to go now, right? Erhua nodded again. Wild Dog thought for a long time before saying, how about this, I'll be the middleman. You owe the shopkeeper money. You can pay when you find your family. Before that, I'll find a place for you to stay. Erhua shook her head. She didn't want to find her father and mother. Wild Dog was slightly surprised. Then, he changed his way of saying, how about this, I'll find you a job. I'll take care of your food and accommodation. You can return the money to the shopkeeper after you earn it. Erhua didn't know what he meant by finding a job, but she nodded her head forcefully. The shopkeeper's face showed that he couldn't bear it. The Freedom Society often forced girls into prostitution. In his opinion, this was what the other party was planning. Even if this little girl was young, she would become an extremely beautiful girl after a few years and could be sold for a good price. But he didn't dare to say it now. He only regretted it in his heart. If he knew this would happen, he would rather not have the 6 tails of silver. Then follow me. Wild Dog stood up with a smile and patted the shopkeeper's shoulder. He looked at him with a sinister gaze and said in an extremely happy voice, Shopkeeper, you don't have any objections to what I said, right? Erhua kept her snacks and said to the shopkeeper very seriously, I'll give you the money. When they left the restaurant, the shopkeeper seemed to have lost all his strength and sat there paralyzed. The others were also silent. Although this wasn't the first time they heard about this, seeing such a beautiful little girl fall into the hands of those rats made them feel suffocated. But what could they do? I'll report it to the authorities. Someone whispered. Immediately, someone pulled him back. If reporting to the authorities was useful, would the Freedom Society be so savage? You'll be the first to die. Everyone became even more silent. First set a small goal, such as 1 second. Remember, bookseller's house. Chapter 1064. On the street, in a restaurant not far away, a few men with thick limbs and ordinary clothes were drinking by the window. One of them looked out of the window and focused his gaze on a few people in the crowd. After a while, he said, It's those rats from the Freedom Society. I wonder where they tricked the little girl from. Another person looked out the window and said, What a pity. It looks like he's from a rich family. These rats are getting bolder and bolder. Should we do something about it? These people were from the Snake Gang, and the one who spoke was a small leader of the Snake Gang. He was at the initial stage of the man-will level and naturally didn't care about the people from the Freedom Society. Forget it, don't be a busybody. Old Fu is getting more and more difficult to deal with these 2 years. Old Man Fu was the helper of the Freedom Association. Although the boat gang was slightly stronger than the Freedom Association, the strength of the boat gang's leader was a level lower than Old Man Fu. Naturally, he was unwilling to provoke the Freedom Association for other matters. On the roof of a building not far away, a man wearing leather armor sat on the roof. His eyes were like a hawk's as they fell on a few people in the crowd. Honeysuckle's confusion had disappeared. He looked at the crowd and the shops on both sides of the street with excitement. She didn't know where to go anyway, so she was tricked by a few simple words. If Renbochin knew about this, he wondered what kind of expression he would have. Wild Dog asked Erhua a few questions from time to time, mainly to find out her background. But every time he asked about this, Erhua would shake her head. Seeing this, Wild Dog didn't ask any further. From the other party's name and the things he brought, it didn't seem like he had any background. He believed that he was good at reading people. Otherwise, he would have died in some corner long ago. As for what he was doing now, it wasn't the first time he was doing it. It was just that in the past, he sold it to a brothel. This time, he only needed to give it to the gang leader. In his heart, he was thinking about what kind of reward such a high-quality person could receive. Would it be gold or some precious cultivation method? No matter what, he would be able to enter the gang leader's eyes. This last point was just as important as the previous rewards. He brought Honeysuckle to where the Freedom Society was located. It was a courtyard with 3 entrances and 3 exits in the east of Yujiang City. The surrounding area was where the Freedom Society was located. Wild Dog, who is this? The 2 guards at the door were surprised to see Two Blossom. Even though Honeysuckle was beautiful, she was still young. Not everyone was a lolicon. Sect leader will probably want to see her. Wild Dog's words were not subtle, the 2 of them immediately understood. Bringing Erhua to a courtyard, Wild Dog smiled warmly at her. You can rest here first. Then, she gave a look to the left and right, asking them to look at her. The courtyard wasn't big and was even a little run down. It was used to look after children like 2 flowers. There were still 2 guards in the courtyard. Wild Dog smiled and asked someone to send Erhua in before he left. Doubtlessly, Erhua did not know any of this. When he was sent into the house, he felt that it was very small and could not be compared to the palace. However, she didn't care. Instead, she was thinking about where to go tomorrow. You want to see the gang leader. The gang leader is cultivating and has no time to see you. Wild Dog, who was eager to take credit, was rebuffed. When will the gang leader come out? I found some good stuff, Sect Master will definitely like it. Go look for Deacon Lin. Wild Dog didn't even have the chance to see the leader of the Freedom Association. Although he could flaunt his prowess in front of ordinary people, he was only at the middle and lower levels of the easygoing society. At most, he was a small leader with only a few people under his command. Therefore, he took it for granted. If it wasn't for the good stuff, he wouldn't have been able to see Deacon Lin whenever he wanted to. After a while, he met with Deacon Lin and only received a sentence, "Let's talk tomorrow." Not long after, Erhua heard a faint sobbing sound that seemed to be nearby. Curious and excited, she couldn't fall asleep, so she pushed the door open and went out. There was no one in the courtyard who sent her here. Instead, there were 2 men in black. When they saw her push the door open, their faces immediately turned cold. Who allowed you to come out? Get lost. Erhua didn't react and pointed at herself doubtfully. One of the men, who was about 40 years old and had a scar on his face, walked toward her with a grin and said, "Of course it was you. Who else could it be? Little bastard, since you are here, you better stay here obediently." Although Erhua was young and insensible, she could understand what was being said and could tell the attitude of others. When she saw the grin on this man's face, she immediately raised her eyebrows and felt very angry. No one had ever spoken to her like this before. If Rinpochen saw her expression, he would definitely find it very familiar. The Empress always had this expression when she wanted to kill someone. With a grin on his face, the man reached out to grab Erhua's head and pushed her forward. Seeing that the man was going to grab her head, Erhua became even more furious and rammed her head into him without thinking. Bang! The man flew backward and spat out a mouthful of blood in midair. The other man was shocked. The people who were sent to this courtyard were all children, and he didn't expect that there would be an expert among them. Although he didn't see clearly, he knew that the person who sent his companion flying and spat out blood definitely wasn't an ordinary person. Little bastard, you are courting death, the other man cursed, drew a knife from his waist, and slashed at Erhua. Seeing the knife, Erhua was a little afraid. The other man was very fierce and had a weapon. She didn't have any combat experience. Fortunately, the other party was very slow. Erhua took 2 steps back and dodged a few consecutive slashes from the other party. She didn't know what to do. Then, she remembered that she had a sword. In the next second, the other party was sent flying by the 4-meter-long sword that suddenly appeared in Erhua's hand, and his body was distorted in the air. Half of the wall was also sent flying. When Erhua ran out of the house, 7 or 8 people had already rushed into the courtyard. When they saw the 2 people lying in the courtyard, they all cursed and rushed over with their knives drawn. Erhua felt very wronged. These people all wanted to beat her up. She felt that she was being bullied. However, she had just sent a person flying with a sword, and this gave her some confidence. The small wooden sword in her hand grew bigger, bigger, and bigger. A 4-meter-long wooden sword that looked like a wooden plank appeared in her hand, and it directly stunned the people who were rushing over. Erhua slapped horizontally again and again, and again. It was as if she was slapping flies. The people who were rushing over were all sent flying back into the wall or out of the courtyard. More people jumped onto the wall and looked at the little girl in the courtyard who was waving the wooden plank with her eyes closed. They were all dumbfounded. Who are you? Deacon Lin, who rushed over, appeared in front of the door. He stared at the small figure in the courtyard and was a little puzzled. How old was this child? How could she be so strong? No matter how he looked at it, Erhua was just an ordinary person. The only thing was that she was terrifyingly strong. Under the fierce gazes of so many people, Erhua's face was full of grievance. She finally remembered who she was. I'm your father. Deacon Lin was so angry that smoke was coming out of his head. He stared coldly at Erhua and ordered. Take her down. On the roof of a house not far away, a man wearing leather armor was holding a telescope and looking at what was happening here. He was originally prepared to make a move, but when he saw the wooden plank in Erhua's hand, he felt that he could wait a little longer. As expected of the princess, as expected of His Majesty's daughter. Although she is young, she has the demeanor of His Majesty. The man praised with a smile on his face. First, set a small goal, such as 1 second. Remember, bookseller's residence. Chapter 1065. Although the words, I'm your father, were spoken in a soft and adorable voice with a tinge of grievance and doubt, it still made Deacon Lin's face turn green. Although Deacon Lin was considered a big shot in Yuzheng City, he was only at the bottom of the hierarchy in the Yun nation. However, his past had distorted his self-esteem. Therefore, at his command, dozens of people on and off the walls pounced on Erhua. The scene was spectacular. However, under the force of the wooden door in Erhua's hand, they were sent flying one by one. However, even though Erhua waved the wooden door like a fan to fend off the flies that pounced on her, her movements revealed flaws. A person standing in the distance approached her like a shadow. His bony hand reached out to grab Honeysuckle's face. Honeysuckle was startled by the sudden appearance of the person. He could even smell the fishy smell coming from the other person's fingers. He immediately jumped back and swung his wooden sword with all his might at the person without thinking. This gave the others a shock as well. Her speed was twice as fast as before. The silhouette who had suddenly appeared thought that the other party was still a child who was just a little stronger. He wanted to take her down with one move, but the wooden sword that had suddenly doubled in speed caused panic to appear in his eyes. His body only managed to dodge halfway before he was directly slapped to the ground. Smack! 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 Erhua seemed to be startled and kept slapping the wooden door in her hand. When she stopped, there was only a pile of flesh and blood left on the ground. Seeing the puddle of things on the ground, Two Blossom burst into tears. This was the first time she had killed someone in her life. Not to mention killing someone, even those rats and birds were given to her by Zhu Hua. Erhua's eyes were red, and tears were dripping down her cheeks. Her mind was completely blank. She looked at the pile of flesh that originally belonged to a person. At this moment, a figure suddenly floated in front of her and kicked her head, sending her flying 7 or 8 meters away. The person who kicked her was Deacon Lin. Deacon Lin was very confident that even an advanced manual expert's head would be smashed by this kick. One had to know that his boots and legs were made of iron. However, something unbelievable happened. Honeysuckle rolled on the ground, turned around, and ran away while crying. Her cries were extremely pitiful. Anyone who saw it would feel sad, and anyone who heard it would shed tears. However, the man on the rooftop had no intention of making a move. Instead, he was a little disappointed. The order from above was to let the little princess suffer a little and hone her skills. He agreed with this point. How could an aboriginal child be pampered like those foreigners? Furthermore, this was a princess. She was born with the strength of an earth will expert and bore the hopes of all the aboriginals. This Deacon Lin was merely at the pinnacle of the man will level and was merely at the threshold of the earth will level. With the little princess's strength as an earth will expert at birth, she could slap him to death with a single slap. He could only watch as the wooden sword in Honeysuckle's hand shrank to the size of a palm. Honeysuckle turned around and ran away while crying. Although Deacon Lin wanted to chase after him, he realized that the other party's speed was faster than he expected. This caused him to be slightly shocked. After all, the other party was only a 7 or 8-year-old child. Not only did he not die from his kick, but he also had such a fast speed. With such strength at such a young age, he definitely didn't come from a humble background like that bastard had said. Furthermore, the door in his hand that could change its size was definitely a treasure. If he was still looking down on her just now, Deacon Lin now understood and thought, I'm in trouble. Now, he only had two choices. The first was to let her run away and bring her family to take revenge. Although she didn't seem to have suffered much, he had given her a kick. He didn't know how serious her injuries were. According to Deacon Lin's conjecture, even if she was fine now, she definitely wouldn't be able to recover. Her family definitely wouldn't let him off. The second choice was to kill her. Then, he would kill everyone who knew about this and refused to admit to it. The second choice was definitely more dangerous than the first, but he could only choose the second one. Otherwise, if the other party came looking for him and was stronger than the Freedom Sect, the sect leader would definitely hand him over. Of course, there was still a third choice, which was to give up everything and leave right now. However, he didn't even know who the other party was or what their background was. If he gave up everything in Yujiang City and fled in a sorry state, no normal person would do such a thing. Although it sounded like a long time, in reality, it was only a few seconds. These thoughts flashed through Deacon Lin's mind and he directly chased after her. From his point of view, although that little brat wasn't slow and had great strength, he didn't have any tricks up his sleeves. He was definitely not a match for him. Honeysuckle cried as she ran out. She was mainly frightened. First, she had killed someone, and second, she had been kicked in the head. She had never experienced anything like this before. Honeysuckle, who was only 3 years old, had her mind completely blank. She ran all over the roof. Then, she ran all the way out of the city before rubbing her red eyes and wiping her snot on her clothes. Looking at the darkness around her, she didn't know where to go. She randomly found a direction and ran, but her speed slowed down. In just a few minutes, Deacon Lin caught up to her. He didn't say anything and directly pounced on her head, kicking Honeysuckle's head. Honeysuckle was kicked away again. While she was still in the air, Deacon Lin kicked her again and again, hitting her 37 times in a row. However, if there was a health bar above Honeysuckle's head, it would only be a few strands. Then, Deacon Lin kicked another door panel. Honeysuckle was also going crazy. Although she was frightened at first, after being kicked dozens of times in a row, all that was left in her mind was anger. After landing on the ground, she rolled over and waved the door panel at Deacon Lin. Deacon Lin wasn't wrong. Honeysuckle really didn't know any tricks. However, he was wrong about one thing. The door panel in Honeysuckle's hand was too big and strong. When it was only facing him, even he couldn't find a chance to dodge it. However, Honeysuckle's speed was too fast. She chased after him, one door panel after another, chasing him and slapping him. Honeysuckle couldn't hit him, but he couldn't do anything to her either. The two of them were in a stalemate for 15 minutes. The anger in Honeysuckle's heart subsided, and her childish nature came out. She wanted to run again. However, Deacon Lin kept following her. Honeysuckle turned around again, took the door panel, and slapped everywhere. The two of them fought for a long time, and no one knew where they ran to. Seeing that the sky was turning bright, Deacon Lin also began to retreat. At the beginning, the two of them were fighting, and he wanted to exhaust the little girl's strength. However, after a night, the other party was still full of energy, but he had almost used up all his strength. Just now, he almost didn't dodge and was hit by the other party. He didn't know if it was an illusion, but the little girl's movement seemed to be faster. And it seemed to be a little more methodical. Just when Deacon Lin was hesitating, Honeysuckle suddenly turned around and threw the door panel at him. At this time, Deacon Lin's speed was also a lot slower, and he was almost hit by the door panel. He was so scared that he broke out in a cold sweat. He made up his mind that he couldn't fight anymore. He would go back to pack his things and leave Yujiang City. However, when he dodged the door panel, he suddenly found that the little figure had taken this opportunity to crash into his arms. Small fists hammered your chest. In an instant, Deacon Lin didn't know how many small fists he had suffered. First, set a small goal, such as 1 second. Chapter 1066. In the past, Renbachian had a unique skill called the Tortoise Fist. At this moment, Honeysuckle was self-taught and automatically learned the first skill. She rushed into Deacon Lin's arms and punched him. Deacon Lin felt as if he had been hit by countless hammers. His chest bones and internal organs were almost all broken into pieces, and his blood and internal organ fragments spurted out. He flew into the air and stopped breathing. His eyes were wide open and filled with indignation. When he came out, he didn't expect to be killed by a little girl. Honeysuckle punched his chest and was stunned for a long time. She went forward to look at the lifeless Deacon, and her eyes turned red again. However, she didn't cry this time. She had experienced things that she had never experienced before, especially after being hunted for an entire night. Although her understanding of the world hadn't improved much, her temperament had changed a lot. From this point of view, Renbachian's plan to train her was a success. Honeysuckle was very hungry. She had never been so hungry since she was young, and her stomach felt like it was overturned. However, she had to find her small wooden sword first. After this night, she suddenly understood that only that toy could protect her in the outside world. After spending some time finding the wooden sword, Honeysuckle wanted to cry again. This time, it was because she was hungry. Her stomach was even hungrier. Furthermore, she missed her father and mother. However, solving the problem of her stomach was more important. Although her snacks were thrown away, Honeysuckle still had a certain amount of wilderness survival experience. She had honed her skills in the garden of the palace. Butterflies. Eat them. Flowers. Eat them. Aphids. Eat them. Cicadas. Honeysuckle. Honeysuckle was in a small forest. She walked in circles, grabbing insects, flowers, and a pitiful number of berries and stuffing them into her mouth. After spending half a day, she finally felt less hungry. Honeysuckle then followed the original path. She wanted to return to the palace. She had to find the previous city before she could take the train back. The outside world wasn't as fun as she thought it would be. Not everyone was as friendly as the people at Shanhui House. However, she didn't know how far she had run last night, but she soon got lost. Honeysuckle was at a loss as she looked at her unfamiliar surroundings. After standing there in a daze for a long time, he could only choose a random direction to walk in. Behind her, the man who had watched her being chased and beaten for an entire night landed near Deacon Lin's body. With a cold smile on his face, he crushed Deacon Lin's head before continuing to follow behind her. Although the little princess was still very young, he realized that the little princess had improved a lot in one night. In the beginning, he did not have the strength to fight back and only knew how to swing the door around randomly. Later on, he gained some skill and even deliberately revealed flaws. It was a world of difference. The growth of the little princess excited him. After all, the little princess's starting point was already so high. Coupled with her speed of growth, he believed that the little princess would become a strong person not weaker than His Majesty in the future. Witnessing the growth of such a powerhouse, even if it was just a small part of it, was enough to make him proud when the little princess grew up. The wild dog curled up into a ball. At this moment, he and the other three were all tied together, with bruises all over their faces. "Brother Go, tell me, how could you have made such a mistake?" The ugly man complained gloomily. Yesterday, when the few of them sent the little girl over, they went back to discuss what rewards they could get and imagined the future. They did not expect to be caught in the middle of the night. First, they were beaten and kicked. Then, they told everything about the little girl and were thrown here. It was said that they would wait for Deacon Lin to come back before dealing with them. Wild Dog's face was gloomy. His eyes were filled with madness and viciousness. In his heart, he was thinking about how to take revenge on those people last night. He also wanted to take revenge on the restaurant owner. That little girl was actually a master. Why didn't anyone tell him? But before that, he still had to lie down like a dog and beg Deacon Lin to let him go. "At most, we made a mistake this time. When Deacon Lin comes back, he will at most punish us. It's no big deal." Although Wild Dog hated the man who was blaming him, he still had to comfort them. "It's not the first time we did this. If we are punished too heavily, what would others think? Who would dare to risk their lives?" "Brother Go is right," another man said with a face full of bad luck. Now, they just had to wait for Deacon Lin to come back. However, from midnight to the afternoon, there was still no movement from Deacon Lin. Deacon Lin won't be in trouble, right? The few of them became more and more uneasy. The ugly man kept talking. "Less nonsense. What can happen to Deacon Lin? There are not many people in Yujiang City who can beat him." Wild Dog scolded. "It's been so long, why hasn't he come back yet? He must have been delayed by something." The few of them could only wait. However, they did not see Deacon Lin. Instead, they saw the gang leader, Fu Zizai, who came out of seclusion early. The few of them were directly thrown to the ground. Sitting in the seat of honor was old Fu, who had just come out of seclusion. He was more than 50 years old and had dark skin. He held a cup of tea in one hand and looked at the few of them with an expressionless face. "Tell me, what happened?" The few of them were startled and hurriedly told the story again. "Gang leader, that little girl is very pretty. I, Wild Dog, have never seen such a pretty girl in my life. I asked her and she is actually called Hua. Listen, is this the name of a child from a rich family? I wanted to give her to you as a show of filial piety as a maidservant. Who knows what happened after that? Until now, I still don't know what happened." Wild Dog tried to express his loyalty and extricate himself from the matter. This way, the gang leader would let him go on account of his hard work even if he didn't make any contributions. Otherwise, everyone in Yujiang City knew how vicious and merciless the gang leader was. "Humph, a little girl with no background. You can't even take down a few dozen people? Deacon Lin has been chasing you for half a day and still hasn't returned. There's no point in keeping your eyeballs." Old Fu's words were filled with the stench of blood, causing the few of them to be scared out of their wits. "Gang leader, we really don't know anything. We are just loyally working for the gang." Wild Dog and the few of them hurriedly begged for mercy. Old Fu looked at the few of them and revealed a cold smile. Just when he was about to speak, he suddenly heard screams and messy footsteps coming from outside. The door was wide open, and the guards outside the courtyard could be seen flying in. Old Fu's face sank. Who was so daring to directly attack the Freedom Society? Following that, his pupils shrank. It was a group of strong men that looked like bears. The Aboriginals. Why are the Aboriginals here? Old Fu's heart trembled as he stood up in a panic. Among the group of Aboriginals who came in from outside, the leader was a burly man in a purple robe. He was about 20 years old and was bald. Many Aboriginals were bald, but this man didn't even have eyebrows. He had a sneer on his face. Beside him was a young girl who looked to be about 17 or 18 years old and was still yawning. Following behind her were 20 burly men who were fully armored and armed with long swords. The weakest among them was an earth-will expert. Old Fu broke out in a cold sweat and trembled all over. He quickly ran out with a fawning smile and asked, "May I know who has come?" The person who came didn't even look at him, walked inside, and sat in the main seat. With an incomprehensible smile on his face, he said, "Not bad, you guys are not bad. Sir, I'm Fu Zizai. How should I address you? What instructions do you have?" Old Fu bowed and spoke in a flattering tone that Wild Dog had never heard before. However, Wild Dog could understand that even the warlord didn't dare to be disrespectful to the Aboriginals. "My surname is Ren Bachien." Ren Bachien said faintly. "So, it's Sir Ren." Old Fu was halfway through his sentence when his eyes widened and he looked terrified. "Your Highness." Ren Bachien continued to speak in a very kind tone, "You guys have done well, really well." Before everyone could understand the meaning behind Ren Bachien's words, his next sentence made them tremble all over. "My daughter is really indebted to you guys for your hospitality. The daughter of the prince and the empress. The daughter of the prince and the empress. Princess." The few of them felt as if they were struck by lightning. Old Fu almost collapsed to the ground. Holding on to his last bit of hope, he asked in a panicked tone, "How can lowly people like us meet the princess? Why haven't we seen her before? Weren't you guys still treating her with great hospitality last night?" Ren Bachin glanced at them and spoke in a voice that was as cold as ice. "Set a small goal first, such as 1 second. Remember, booksellers. Chapter 1067. Ren Baqian's words scared them out of their wits. In Wild Dog's heart, their powerful and ferocious gang leader was trembling like a sieve. Guangshao Literature Network. Net, Your Highness, I just came out of seclusion. I don't know anything. It was these people who acted on their own and offended the princess. I really don't know anything. Old Fu's face was full of panic and despair. It doesn't matter. Ren Baqian waved his hand. His simple and calm words gave Old Fu a glimmer of hope. However, the next sentence sent him into an icy abyss. Money, power, and women, you have enjoyed all that you should have, so you have no regrets in death. When I came here, I asked someone to inquire about what you have done over the years, so you won't die unjustly. Ren Baqian said in an extremely calm voice. He didn't even look at the people below him. Bean-sized beads of sweat rolled down Old Fu's forehead, his lips turned pale, and his eyes were filled with fear and unwillingness. However, in the next second, Old Fu suddenly jumped up, broke through the roof, and fled into the distance. He didn't dare to attack Ren Baqian and only hoped that he could escape. It wasn't impossible. Although Ren Baqian had brought Earthwill experts with him, it was common knowledge that the Aboriginals were very strong, but their explosive speed was relatively average and their body techniques were even worse. If it were just these guards, it wasn't impossible for him to escape. However, Ren Baqian didn't only bring the winged cavalry. Ren Baqian got up and rubbed the head of Lin Chaola, who was dozing off, and said, "Get up and get to work. Bring him back, alive. I will add a chicken drumstick for you tonight." She was the cheapest spirit will expert. Lin Chaola slapped Ren Baqian's hand away and leaped out of the roof that Old Fu had smashed open. Within a few minutes, she returned with a black-faced and trembling Old Fu. "Your Highness, kill them all." The guards who came with her showed a sinister smile. "Hang them. Set up a row of poles in front of the door and hang them all." Ren Baqian's words decided the fate of everyone in the Freedom Club. The people of the Yun Nation wouldn't be dissatisfied with killing a gang like the Freedom Society that did all kinds of bad things. Instead, they would be grateful. If they were all hanged outside, it would serve as a reminder to everyone. The Imperial Court of Deo wasn't like the Imperial Court of the Yun Nation, which couldn't control the local government and allowed some thieves to collude with the officials to commit crimes. When City Lord Yujiang rushed over with a head full of sweat, he saw corpses hanging on poles, fluttering like banners. There were over 100 of them. Fu Zizai is also hanging on it. Other than Lin Xian of the Zizai Society, everyone else is there, a scholar said to him in a low voice. When the soldiers accompanying City Lord Yujiang saw this scene, there was a slight commotion. "Everyone, be quiet and wait here obediently." City Lord Yujiang turned around and gave the order. He tidied up his clothes and hurriedly entered the Freedom Society's lair. He couldn't help wondering why Zhao Prince Consort was here. He was almost scared to death when he heard that Zhao Prince Consort had come here and was heading straight for the Freedom Association. When he saw the corpses hanging outside, he knew that the Freedom Society must have somehow offended this top figure. Otherwise, a small power like the Freedom Society wouldn't have caught his eye. The question was, how did these rats provoke him? A moment later, Ren Baqian saw him. "Yu Qingdong pays his respects to your highness." He glanced at him and said faintly, "Your Yujiang city is really a place that harbors evil. Don't tell me that you don't know. I'm guilty of dereliction of duty." Yu Qingdong didn't dare to defend himself. He lowered his head and didn't dare to wipe the sweat from his eyes. Ren Baqian was just giving him a warning. He knew that these rats could be found everywhere. Once a batch was killed, another batch would pop up. Besides, other than the Freedom Society, everything else in Yujiang City was in order. Yu Qingdong was considered a talent, so he naturally wouldn't make things too difficult for him. It's good that you know that you are guilty. If there is a next time, I will only see your head. Yes, yes. I know my mistake. Yu Qingdong repeatedly responded, even though he didn't know what Renbaqian meant by, there is a next time. Renbaqian asked his men to bring a few boys and girls between the ages of 4 and 10. Everyone was full of fear. Renbaqian looked at them and couldn't help but give them another warning. This freedom society abducts and deceives children just to dig out their hearts to drink. Such people can actually live until now. Yu Qingdong's forehead was sweating again. It's my dereliction of duty. You even dare to have designs on the princess, ha? Renbaqian sneered with a murderous look. Yu Qingdong almost collapsed to the ground when he heard this. The princess came to Yujiang City. The Freedom Society dared to have designs on the princess. If I knew that you were so eager to die, I would have sent you to the netherworld. I will spare your life this time. Send these children to settle down and find their families. Renbaqian waved his hand. Yu Qingdong made arrangements for these children and held a banquet at the warlord's residence. This time, Renbaqian didn't refuse. After giving them a warning, he met with the local officials at an appropriate time to let them do their work with peace of mind. Although he came for Erhua, he also had to represent the court's attitude. The next evening, Renbaqian stood on the second floor of a restaurant on Guan Road and looked down. Erhua was right below. At this time, Erhua was dirty, had stains on her small face, and her clothes were a little torn. Most importantly, she was surrounded by a few young beggars. Renbaqian didn't expect that in one night, Erhua would actually recruit a few young beggars and become the chief of the beggar sect. It was said that in a temple outside the city last night, Erhua snatched the sleeping quarters of a few young beggars and showed off her skills. She was immediately regarded as a celestial being by those young beggars. In the alley diagonally opposite the restaurant, 2 flower and 5 little beggars were facing 3 or 4 adults. Both sides were talking about something, and it seemed like they were fighting over territory. Among beggars, this kind of situation was very common. Erhua didn't know what the other party said, but she seemed very angry. She then rushed over and punched and kicked those beggars to the ground before leaving the alley with a few cheering young beggars. The princess has finally learned to talk with her fists. The imperial guards standing beside Renbaqian were so touched that tears almost fell from their eyes when they saw this scene. These imperial guards had watched Erhua grow up. In the past, she only used her fists to cause trouble, but now, she had finally learned to fight for territory with her fists. Renbaqian's mouth twitched. Was this something to be happy about? However, looking at Erhua's dirty appearance, Renbaqian felt a little suffocated and distressed. Although Erhua often rolled on the ground and dug tunnels in the palace, making her look like a muddy ball, that was completely different from what she was doing now. Renbaqian really wanted to rush down now, give Erhua a good bath, and let her have a good meal. He thought that she hadn't eaten well for the past few days. However, he suppressed this urge because he wanted to see more. Chapter 1068. After a day of depression, Honeysuckle felt much better now. After all, she was still a child. She would forget about her sadness when she saw something new. She was the happiest now that she had 5 little brothers. Boss. A young beggar handed over a piece of cake. This was the best thing he had begged for today. It was only bitten, and there wasn't much dust on it. Call me Dad. Honeysuckle took the cake and stuffed it into his mouth, swallowing it in a few bites. One cake was almost the same as eating nothing. However, the others ate even less. Honeysuckle's eyes began to wander around a mouse that was peeking its head out in the corner of the dilapidated temple. His face revealed a greedy expression. However, half of that fellow's body was still in the hole. He had to wait for it to run out before he could make a move. Dad! The young beggar didn't have any moral integrity and immediately changed his address. To him, surviving was the most important thing. As for moral integrity, as long as he was given a bowl of porridge, he would be fine with calling him Grandpa. Moreover, this new boss was very powerful. Those who bullied them before were all defeated by the boss today. He believed that he could beg for more food in the future. That way, it would be easier for him to survive. Dad, you're so powerful. Can you teach us? The young beggar had a fawning expression. If he could learn 10% of the new boss's skills, he wouldn't have to be afraid of being bullied in the future. Honeysuckle rolled his eyes and thought about it seriously. Then, he told them, eat more meat. Boss, you've eaten a lot of meat. The few of them were a little surprised. Unless they could catch a bird or something, they wouldn't be able to eat meat for a month. However, thinking of the boss's strength, eating meat was normal. However, those rich families in the city could also eat meat. They didn't see anyone as powerful as the boss. Call me Dad. Not boss. Honeysuckle corrected them firmly. Then, he asked curiously, is it not normal to eat meat? It's not normal for us. The young beggars mumbled. However, they quickly became excited. If they followed the new boss, they would definitely have meat to eat in the future. At this moment, Honeysuckle's figure moved and disappeared. The few of them jumped in fright and turned their heads to look around. Only then did they discover the boss standing in the corner with an unconcealable smile on his face. He was holding a very large rat in his hand and said excitedly, "There's meat to eat." Not far away, on a tree in the darkness, the few people in the temple could be seen. Renbochin put down his binoculars and felt a toothache when he saw Lu Hua holding a mouse and sitting back in his seat. He then discussed with the others how to eat this mouse. The rats in the Yun nation were different from those in Dayo. The rats in Dayo mainly ate grass roots for a living and were much cleaner than those from the Yun nation, which ate everything. Go and buy a few roasted chickens. Renbochin ordered the guards below. The guard was very fast. In less than 10 minutes, he brought back 5 roast chickens and a large piece of beef. Break the roof and throw it in. Let them know that roast chicken can fall from the sky. Don't let Erhua find out. Otherwise, I'll deduct your allowance, Renbochin instructed as he raised his chin. Only Lin Chalo was qualified for this task. With the speed of the aboriginals, the roof would probably collapse if she jumped onto it. The guards below found it a little funny. It was Her Highness who said that he wanted to train the princess, but she was more nervous than anyone else. However, they still kept an eye on the situation in the temple. Lin Chalo waved her small fist at Renbochin and stuffed a chicken leg into her mouth. Renbochin kept staring at her with a murderous gaze. Erhua was still hungry, yet she actually snatched his chicken leg. Do you still want to get paid in the future? After eating the chicken leg, Lin Chalo landed on the roof of the dilapidated temple and found a gap to throw the bag of food down. Before Erhua could rush out to check, she had already disappeared into the darkness. A moment later, there was a burst of cheers in the dilapidated temple. For the next few days, Renbochin and his men kept an eye on Erhua in the dark. During this period, Erhua always felt that someone was watching him and almost discovered Renbochin and his men a few times. Erhua has even learned how to counter surveillance. Renbochin hid behind the window of a restaurant with a gratified look on his face. Well, Renbochin's perception was purely an illusion. After all, the gazes of this group of people were too fixed on him. Anyone with a little more sensitivity would be able to detect it. Your Highness, there are more than 20 beggars in front. I'm afraid they are here to cause trouble for the princess, a guard whispered into Renbochin's ear. Renbochin nodded slightly and continued to observe from behind the window. Behind him was a group of guards who were peeking their heads out. A group of people squatted behind the window like fools. Below, Erhua clasped her hands behind her back and looked at the people on the street with longing in her eyes. She especially looked at the children whose hands were held by the adults at home. She missed her father and mother a little. She was very distressed because she didn't know how to go back. She also didn't know if her father and mother would find her. She simply didn't expect that her biological father had been hiding in the dark and following her for many days. On the other hand, those little beggars were scattered on the street looking for people to beg for money. They were often scolded and sometimes beaten, but that was when she had to step in. She was the one who took care of those little brothers, and only she could beat them. She had already discovered that the people here weren't as strong as the people inside and outside the palace. They could be said to be very weak. Even the people on the street that she had seen when she sneaked out of the palace were much stronger than the people here. While she was letting her imagination run wild, she suddenly heard a shout coming from nearby. She turned her head and saw her little brother, Fuji, being kicked and trampled on the ground. Many people wearing patched clothes were looking at her. "What are you doing? Let go of Fuji." Erhua fearlessly took a few steps forward and shouted in an indistinct young girl's voice, sounding a little angry. "It's this little bitch," a beggar pointed at Erhua and scolded. On the second floor, Renbachian's eyes flashed, and the many guards behind him emitted a cold murderous aura. "Little bastard, kowtow to me a few times, and I'll let him go." The leader of the beggars was very strong and sneered at Erhua. At this time, a few other little beggars also ran behind Erhua and looked worriedly at Fuji, who was being stepped on. Although they were a little scared and their legs were trembling, they didn't run away. "What's kowtowing?" Erhua looked blankly at the few little beggars around her and asked. "I'll kowtow to you, and you'll let Fuji go," a skinny little girl bit her lip and shouted at the other side. "Pfft, who do you think you are? Hurry up and kowtow, or I'll trample him to death," the beggar who was stepping on Fuji's back said viciously. "Boss, don't worry about me. Run. Call me Dad." Erhua stubbornly corrected the way she addressed him. "What did she say? Call him Dad. A little bastard wants you to call him Dad." The beggar opposite her immediately laughed. Although Erhua didn't understand a lot of things, she could feel that the other party's attitude was full of malice. The other party really didn't hide it at all. Erhua didn't want to listen to them anymore. Saving Fuji was more important now. The other party looked at the toy wooden sword in Erhua's hand and couldn't help but laugh. "Little bastard, are you going to use this thing to defeat us?" The surrounding commoners also shook their heads. This little girl was going to be out of luck. However, the next second, the laughing beggars were like chickens that had their necks pinched, and they let out a sound. The toy wooden sword in Honeysuckle's hand had turned into a 4-meter-long door plank. With a whistling sound, it slammed towards them. The beggars in this world weren't like the beggars in the movie, The Condor Shooters. Although the beggar leading the group was a little strong, he was only a little stronger than an ordinary person. With just one blow, he sent the people around him flying into the shops on both sides of the street. Erhua waved the sword a few times, and the people opposite her disappeared. The shops on both sides of the street were smashed into pieces, and waves of curses could be heard. As for the onlookers on the street, they were already stunned. Renbachian stood up and stood behind the window. He knew that it was about time. After all, a wooden sword that could change its size was definitely a treasure in the eyes of ordinary people. Now that it was seen in the hands of such a small beggar, there would definitely be many people eyeing it. He wasn't going to set up a trap. That was too immoral. Baidu search 081 Chinese network yen. No advertising message. Chapter 1069. In the eyes of 99% of the people, the wooden sword was an incredible treasure. After all, a weapon that suddenly grew an inch, a foot, or even 10 feet could kill the opponent. However, in the eyes of a spirit wool expert who had condensed a heaven-grade weapon, it was just a toy. The condensed heaven-grade weapon was a part of the owner's body and was equivalent to an extended limb. It was completely connected to the owner's mind and had all kinds of unique functions. Being able to grow and shrink was just a very common characteristic. Renbochin felt that letting Erhua wander around the streets with a treasure in the eyes of others was akin to fishing. He was ready to bring Erhua back at any time. However, to his surprise, none of the experts had any designs on Erhua. All of them obediently stayed in their sects and didn't step out of their doors, as if they had transformed into homebodies. Only 2 man-wool experts who weren't afraid of death went to find trouble with Erhua. Then, the imperial family had 2 more members. Renbochin got someone to ask around and realized that the news of him being here had long been known by those well-informed sections. This place wasn't far from Yujiang City. The members of the Freedom Society were still hanging on the wooden poles to dry, and the sects were all extremely well-behaved. No matter how good a treasure was, it still required one's life. Under such circumstances, Renbochin waited for a few more days. He watched as Erhua gathered more than 50 people and unified half of the beggars in the city before appearing in front of her. Erhua sat in the dilapidated temple in a daze. Now that she had more than 50 subordinates, she naturally didn't need to go out and look for food anymore. She didn't understand what it meant to fight for territory or to gather subordinates. In fact, these people took the initiative to come to her and became her subordinates after being beaten up by her. However, there was more food than before, which made her very happy. Her face wasn't as dirty as it was a few days ago and was now very clean. She was still wearing the same clothes that she came out of the temple, but they had been washed and mended. There were 2 bonfires outside the dilapidated temple with 2 broken pots on top. The beggars threw the things they begged and some wild vegetables into the pots to stew. The surrounding people glanced at the big pots from time to time and then at the dazed young lady sitting in the temple. Although they were reluctant at first, after being beaten up by Erhua, they also felt that there was nothing wrong with following such a powerful boss. People like them, who lived at the bottom of society, were even lower than rats. Who knew when they would die on the streets? Starving to death, being beaten to death, or even being bitten to death by other people's pets, no one cared. And a boss who could stand up for him would at least be able to avenge him. Especially since boss was still so young, he would definitely become more powerful in the future. However, many people knew that their boss was different from them. Just by looking at the clothes she was wearing, they knew that it wasn't something an ordinary person could wear. Perhaps boss had accidentally ended up here and would leave soon. In that case, they would have to continue living their previous lives. It's done. Let's eat. The girl who had been stirring the pot with a stick cheered. She found a bowl and scooped a big bowl for Honeysuckle. Although the bowl was a little broken, it was the best one around. Just as everyone was lining up to scoop food out of the pot with broken bowls, the sound of heavy footsteps attracted everyone's attention. A bald man in a purple robe walked out from the darkness. His steps were slow but steady, giving everyone a great deal of pressure. Following his appearance, several ferocious-looking burly men appeared in front of everyone. Even if they didn't introduce themselves, everyone would still be able to recognize them. Aboriginals. They used to be barbarians and were now the masters of the Yun nation. What were they doing here? Everyone was a little panicked. Wherever these aboriginals appeared, there would always be massacres. Even the bravest people didn't dare to step forward and ask why they were here. Everyone was pressured by the other party's footsteps and couldn't help but retreat. Many people looked at the girl in the temple to see what she would do. When they looked over, they only saw the girl's face full of surprise. Father! Honeysuckle ran into Renboccian's arms in a flash, and tears fell down her cheeks. Although she was the one who ran away from home, she missed her father and mother very much. Renboccian took Honeysuckle's head hammer and punches on her chest. He patted her head and looked at everyone, causing them to lower their heads involuntarily. Everyone was shocked. What did Boss say just now? Father. This aboriginal youth was Boss's father. Boss was an aboriginal. Renboccian's stomach hurt from Honeysuckle's hammer. He put his hands under Honeysuckle's ribs and picked her up. After carefully sizing her up, he gritted his teeth and said, "Have you grown up? You even learned to run away from home." With reddened eyes, Honeysuckle kicked Renboccian and asked, "Why did you only look for me now?" This time, Renboccian's stomach really hurt, and his head kept twitching. He held his stomach with one hand and groaned. "You didn't even leave a note. Where can I find you? It's good enough that I can find you. Otherwise, you can only be the chief of the beggar sect." Renboccian didn't mention that he had been following Honeysuckle for half a month. Honeysuckle was a little embarrassed and hit Renboccian's head again. She bumped into his arms and said, "I miss my father and mother. Let's go home then." Renboccian patted her back and said softly. Honeysuckle had suffered a lot during this half a month, and educating her was something to be done when they returned home. "Okay." Honeysuckle nodded and jumped out of Renboccian's arms. She took a few steps back, stretched out her hand, and drew a circle behind her. "They are under my protection." "Do you know what protection means?" Renboccian couldn't help but tease her. "They pay me protection fees, and I stand up for them." Honeysuckle raised her small face and said proudly. "Who taught you that?" Renboccian raised his eyebrows. "Oh, there wasn't such a thing. Brother Rensia." Renboccian sneered. That guy was dead meat. Honeysuckle seemed to have thought of something and suddenly ran back to the rundown temple. She came out with a broken bowl and raised it in front of Renboccian. "The best is for Dad." Renboccian immediately beamed with joy. In the past, Honeysuckle never shared any with him when she was eating rats. It had only been half a month, and she was already so sensible. He took the slightly greasy bowl and looked at the messy things inside. There was also a strange smell. Even though Renboccian didn't want to eat it at all, he looked at Honeysuckle's expectant eyes and tilted his head back to pour it in. It had to be said that this was a kind of happy pain, or a kind of painful happiness. Renboccian's stomach churned after pouring the bowl into his mouth. He had never eaten such terrible food since he was young. However, he still smiled at Honeysuckle in appreciation. Then, he looked at Honeysuckle with a black face and excitedly ran over to fill another bowl for him. Renboccian handed the bowl to the guard behind him and said to Honeysuckle with a smile, "Everyone has been looking for you for the past few days. They have been working very hard and are still hungry." The guard who took the broken bowl was at a loss. He wanted to say that he was full, but he pinched his nose and swallowed the food when he met the little princess's clear gaze. Honeysuckle then apologized to the guard behind him and said, "They haven't eaten yet. This is all. It's okay, we can still hold on for a while." Everyone felt as if they had heard the sound of nature, except for the guard behind Renboccian who looked bitter and thought, "Why am I so close to him?" Renboccian patted Honeysuckle's head and said, "All right, your queen misses you very much. It's time to go back." "Okay." Honeysuckle nodded happily at first, then turned to look at the people behind him and asked, "Are they coming along?" "First, set a small goal, such as 1 second. Chapter 1070. Since the appearance of Renboccian and the others, the dozens of beggars at the bottom of this world had been feeling uneasy. Although some of them would act like evil beggars and bully the obviously weak beggars in order to seize territory, everyone was the same when facing the Aboriginals. They were no different from ants waiting to be judged. The only difference was that they would bleed a little more. What shocked them was the new leader. That girl, who was a few years old, was actually an Aboriginal. She seemed to have a high status, at least from the looks of the young man. Then, they saw the leader give the young man, who looked like a big shot, a bowl of soup that they and the others drank, which made them feel a little ashamed. After all, the leader seemed to be someone with status, yet he actually drank such unpalatable food with the beggars. Furthermore, the young man really drank a bowl of soup, even though he looked terrible. Everyone could understand that the new leader was going back with the young man. Although they were envious, the new leader was obviously from a different world from them. However, what surprised them was that the new leader, who was a few years old, actually wanted to take them and the others away. At this time, they were like people waiting to be judged, and their hearts were tangled with excitement and apprehension. Renbochin touched Honeysuckle's head and said, "They have their own lives, and I will give them a chance to live like humans. However, your world isn't suitable for them, and their world isn't suitable for you. Do you understand?" The beggars weren't very disappointed after hearing Renbochin's words. This was to be expected, wasn't it? Furthermore, the other party said that he would give them a chance to live like humans, which made them a little excited. If possible, who wouldn't want to live like humans? They are under my protection. They call me father. I want to take them with me. Honeysuckle didn't want to give up on his subordinates. Renbochin raised his eyebrows. The imperial family suddenly had so many people, and he would be beaten up again when he returned. However, this was also an opportunity to teach Honeysuckle. They are too weak and can't adapt to life in Lawn City. Even a child is stronger than them. They will be bullied and have a hard time living. Although you have good intentions, only here is suitable for them. The people here are also weak, and they won't stand out here. This is their world. I'll protect them. Honeysuckle waved his arms stubbornly. Renbochin raised his eyebrows. All right, there was still no such thing. Renbochin raised his head and scanned the crowd before lowering his head to look at Honeysuckle. He sighed and said, "The capital still lacks some janitors. If they go there, you will still see them." Renbochin comforted Honeysuckle, stood up, and said to everyone, "After this, I will send all of you to the capital to clean the streets. You will be paid. Although you won't be able to earn a lot of money, your life will be better than it is now. At least you won't starve to death. If you don't want to go, you can leave. If you want to go, stay. Those who are still here tomorrow morning, someone will escort you out." Initially, Renbochin was prepared to find a random merchant association to leak some information to give these people a living. From his point of view, this was the most suitable method. However, since Honeysuckle insisted, he would let them go to the imperial capital. There was no need to say more. These people were just an insignificant part of Duohua's growth. "All right, let's go." Renbochin patted Honeysuckle, took her hand, and left. "I'll go and see you. I'll take care of you." Honeysuckle turned around and waved goodbye to everyone. The others weren't as naive as Honeysuckle and knew that their worlds would probably never cross again. Although the beggars couldn't bear to part with her, their eyes were red as they bit their lips and watched Honeysuckle leave. They all knew that they weren't from the same world. Renbochin brought Honeysuckle back to the inn and let her take a bath before changing into a new set of clothes. He had prepared all of this beforehand. The next day, an imperial guard was left behind, and everyone returned to Yujiang to board the train. This trip lasted for half a month. The Empress was very unhappy with the phone calls these past 2 days. However, Renbochin was in a good mood. Honeysuckle had grown a lot in this half a month. Sure enough, He couldn't let Honeysuckle play in the palace all the time. Through learning, she could grow faster. Why did you let them call you father? Renbochin asked curiously. He was very curious about what Honeysuckle was thinking. Honeysuckle took a sip of her saliva before replying in an indistinct, girlish voice, I'm father, so I can beat them up and they can't fight back. I can also let them copy the 3-character classic and they have to listen to me. Renbochin's mouth twitched. Was this her definition of father? Well, it seemed like it was indeed his doing. He then seriously educated her, the next time you beat someone up, you can let them call you father. Father is my special title. No, father is the best. Honeysuckle stubbornly said. Well, I'm the best. Renbochin laughed. As Honeysuckle learned more things, her way of thinking would probably change. Empress, I miss you. Honeysuckle pounced on the Empress and hit her stomach with her head. Then, the Empress skillfully pressed Honeysuckle onto her knees with a cold face and slapped her buttocks. After slapping her more than a dozen times, the expected crying didn't come. Honeysuckle's eyes were red, and she held back her tears. She didn't make a fuss like before. The Empress raised her head and looked at Renbochin in surprise. Renbochin leaned against a pillar and watched the warm mother-daughter interaction. He laughed and said, Honeysuckle has grown up and doesn't cry as much as before. If there's a next time. The Empress turned Honeysuckle around and placed her on her knees. Honeysuckle grimaced and her buttocks were swollen. She carefully looked at Honeysuckle and whispered, You've lost weight. Empress. Honeysuckle looked at the Empress, kissed her face, and hugged her neck without letting go. The Empress felt a little uncomfortable. This wasn't the way she interacted with Honeysuckle. She had never been such an enthusiastic person, even after becoming a mother. Someone, take her away and wash her. She's stinking. The Empress threw Honeysuckle to Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan. Renbochin sneered. Was the Empress being tsundere? Was she being tsundere to her own daughter? Well, being a good wife and loving mother wasn't the Empress's image. The Empress heard the laughter and glanced at Renbochin. Seeing that he was laughing weirdly, she got angry and asked, Why did you take so long to come back? Honeysuckle has grown a lot while she was out there. Renbochin whispered. He then told her about what Honeysuckle had done during this period, from being tricked into joining the Freedom Society to being chased by an Earth-will expert for an entire night before killing him, and then taking in a bunch of beggars as his underlings. Sure enough, she needs to experience some things. Renbochin sighed. I'm asking why you took so long, the Empress asked coldly. Renbochin thought, Didn't I make it very clear? Have you submitted a report for being gone for half a month? Have you applied for it? Have I approved it? I'm asking you to look for your daughter, not to wander around outside. You watched her become a beggar for half a month. Then, you feasted on her. Oh, you even accepted 2 invitations. The Empress sneered. Someone, close the door. Hey, I just came back and haven't eaten yet. Your Majesty, what do you want to do? Baidu Search 881 Chinese Network, no advertising messages. Chapter 1071. Hua went to kindergarten. Although Renbochin hoped to build a kindergarten after moving to the capital, that would take another 3 months. Taking advantage of Hua's absence, he sent her to the first kindergarten in this world a week after her return. Later, a second one would be built in the capital. There were about 100 children between the ages of 3 and 6 in the kindergarten, and only 1/3 of them were the children of court officials. The fertility of the aboriginals was too low, and there were only so many children of the right age. There weren't many of them even if they were all sent here, and not everyone was willing to send them. In particular, some of the more talented ones had already started to lay the foundation at a young age, and the education at home was more in line with their plans and expectations. In other words, they believed in the hundreds and thousands of years of experience of the Aboriginals. Rinpoche also believed that they would definitely be able to cultivate a group of boorish people who would directly confront any situation. Hua was also very excited to have so many children to play with. On the first day of school, she got along with all the children. Rinpoche held the report in his hand and rubbed his forehead. There were another 100 more people in the imperial family. In just 4 hours, Honeysuckle had beaten all the children into submission. It seemed that her experience in the Yun nation made her particularly fond of winning people over by virtue. However, Rinpoche felt that Hua wasn't just like this. She actually didn't know how to interact with other children. She wanted to play with other children, but she used a different method. Honeysuckle believed that the identity of father could control everyone. As long as someone accepted this identity, they were her people. They had to listen to her, play with her, stand on the same line as her, and be protected by her. This reminded Rinpoche of an anime character that he had seen decades ago when he was still an ordinary person. Whitebeard. Whitebeard wanted to have a family, and his dream was to create a huge family. Although Hua had a different background and thought differently, they walked the same path. Rinpoche had a slight guess that it was probably loneliness and the desire to dominate. The latter was easy to understand. Everyone had this kind of desire, and children would express this desire even more openly. As for the former, he and the Empress spent too little time with her. Although Zhu Hua was always with her, Zhu Hua couldn't replace her parents. Rinpoche was busy, the Empress was a little arrogant, and the two of them weren't the kind of parents who were particularly close to their children. This was the result of not taking the parental work permit. Rinpoche crossed his arms and pondered for a long time. He then put this matter aside and asked someone to call Shurgan and Tonglan over. Principal. The two of them greeted. The young people from the academy were still willing to address him this way, and he liked it. Get ready. You guys will make a trip to Great Xia. We're leaving tomorrow. What are we going to do? The two of them looked over curiously. One had to know that the plane was in the stage of preparing for its flight test. What was so important that they were asked to go to Great Xia at this time? Rinpoche didn't hide anything from them and briefly told them about the Go Home organization. Right now, there is still a group of people resisting stubbornly. Let them have a taste of these 2 nuclear bombs. If they still don't surrender, let the other one hit their heads. It was only then that they realized that Principal Ren was about to unify the Great Xia martial arts world. Even Li Yuanzhu was part of this organization. Although the Aboriginals were very reckless, they still respected experts. In particular, Li Yuanzhu was ranked above His Majesty. Although all the Aboriginals believed that His Majesty could definitely kill her in a real fight, they did not believe that His Majesty could kill her. However, they had to admit that her strength was only below His Majesty's. Subsequently, the two of them became excited. Ever since they saw a nuclear bomb, there wasn't a single student who didn't think about it. Explosions were power. Over the past 3 years, the laboratory had been bombed so many times, which was enough to show that these guys were passionate about bombs. This time, they could actually use nuclear warheads to blow people up, which was enough to make these 2 dishonest guys excited. Tonglan stood up straight, looked up, and put her hands behind her back. Shurgan couldn't hide the smile on his face even though he had a full beard. Go back and make some preparations. Hand over the matters in your hands to others. Come back tomorrow morning. The people from the Department of Inspection will go with you. Someone will pick you up when you arrive in Great Xia. Understood. The two of them nodded and left. After that, Rinpoche dealt with the matters in the capital. At present, 200,000 Aboriginals and 200,000 Jing tribe people had moved to the capital. Some of the Yun Nation's chambers of commerce had also opened shops in the capital, which had completely changed the capital. However, this was followed by conflict. The Aboriginals who had moved out from the 60,000 mountains were fierce, barbaric, and had no concept of law or discipline. They were completely respectful of the strong and had caused a lot of trouble in the capital. They had injured the Jing tribe people and the people of the Yun Nation, and there were even many fights between the Aboriginals. Although Rinpoche had expected this situation, he still felt annoyed. There was really nothing wrong with other people calling the Aboriginals barbarians. If it weren't for the Empress, he wouldn't have a good impression of these troublemakers. After all, Rinpoche had grown up on Earth, a world that operated according to order most of the time, and he naturally didn't like to disrupt order. After dealing with the matters in the capital, Rinpoche strolled to a shop on Beihang Street with his guards. The 3 shops were the size of normal shops and were magnificently decorated. The words, "Tavern Heaven on Earth," were hung on the door. This was a shop that Rinpoche had recently opened, and he liked coming here. As a northerner, he had a special fondness for the bathhouse culture. Compared to the baths in the palace, this place was more relaxing. There weren't many people inside. Rinpoche walked in with a towel wrapped around his waist and saw Qin Chuan sitting in the pool with his hands on the edge and his eyes slightly closed. "Oh, it's your highness. What brings you here today?" Qin Chuan recognized Rinpoche without even opening his eyes. "Minister Qin." Rinpoche greeted him and sat in the pool with a scarf wrapped around his waist. The two of them briefly chatted about the situation of the Protectorate of the South and the 60,000 mountains. Recently, 2 more villages of the foreign races had been discovered, and some scouts had died. The army marked the locations and moved in other directions. After dealing with the people from Great Xia, they would gather experts to wipe them out. After the bath, the 2 of them swayed their bodies and went to the lounge on the 2nd floor. There was a group of Aboriginal masseurs there, and the strongest among them was at the Kismet Heaven level. Although their movements were very barbaric, the effect was pretty good. More importantly, they were good-looking. Qin Chuan lay on the pure steel massage bed and gave Rinpoche a thumbs up. "This place is pretty good. There are also masseurs in the capital, right?" "Of course." Rinpoche nodded. He was going to transfer these masseurs to the capital. After all, it wasn't easy to hire masseurs who were at the Kismet Heaven level, and Rinpoche could offer sky-high salaries. After most of the departments were transferred to the capital, the middle-level and low-level officials who stayed behind wouldn't be able to use such powerful masseurs. 4-way masseurs were enough. First, set a small goal, such as 1 second. Remember, book house. Chapter 1072. In a small town in the east of Great Xia was the painted screen sword tower. The entire town was like this. Everyone in the town had a certain relationship with the painted screen sword tower. For example, if an ancestor was a disciple of the painted screen sword tower, the descendant would be an ordinary person in the town. If a talented descendant appeared, he would become a disciple of the painted screen sword tower. It was the same for merchants, peddlers, night watchmen, and beggars. However, things had changed recently. There were tens of thousands of people in the painted screen sword tower, causing the small town to be overcrowded. This situation had been going on for a few months. Although no one said anything and these ordinary people and low-level disciples didn't know what was going on, everyone could feel that a storm was brewing. The center of the town was where the reception hall was called Bright Sword Hall. At this moment, dozens of people were sitting in Bright Sword Hall. These dozens of people were the top experts of Great Xia. A stomp of their feet could shake Great Xia's pugilistic world. However, with so many experts gathered together, there was only a haze. Some had anger on their faces, some were unwilling, some were deep in thought, some were smiling, and some were expressionless. However, no one was relaxed. Ma Hongyu, Golden Child, Duke Inu, Elders Yang and Yen are in Sunstone Town in the north. Other than them, there are about 100 disciples. Gluttonous Duke, Blood Sea Demon, Lu Yi, Zhao Zhao Zhao, and Lu Su are in Gujiao Dam. There should be more than 10 experts that haven't been discovered. Su Gongso, Du Qian, Gao Yi, Tao Qian. 13 experts with their disciples are in Riverside Town. As names were said, the hall became even more silent. In other words, we are surrounded, right? Do they think we're made of mud? As long as we attack one place, they won't be able to stop us. When we return, everyone in the painted screen sword tower will be in their hands. So what? As long as we're alive, will they dare to kill everyone? They seem to have a way to communicate. If we attack one place, we'll be killed as long as we're delayed. Then we'll wait here for them to attack. If it were up to me, we'll wait here. They have a way, but we're not inferior either. Even if we die, we have to bite off a piece of meat from them. I don't believe that they are all united and not afraid of death. Jiang Zixi felt a headache as he listened to the quarrels of others. Although he was forced to gather here, these people were all top experts. Naturally, they would not be obedient to him. Everyone had their own ideas, so it was natural for them to quarrel. Jiang Zixi's face darkened as he recalled what Ma Hongyu had said to him. Even if what the other party said was true, Zhang Xian had no interest in participating. However, he had not expected the other party to be so domineering and forceful, saying that those who submitted to him would prosper or those who opposed him would die. Coupled with the subsequent events, the current situation had developed. Since they want to fight, then let's fight. I, Jiang Zixi, would rather die than be someone else's subordinate and listen to someone else's command. On the contrary, the 70+ experts who had returned to the organization were getting along quite well. The main thing was to arrange for people of similar natures to gather in 7 different cities, which would reduce a lot of disputes. Otherwise, people like Fire Snake Tao Qian and Blood Sea Old Geezer would easily get into a fight. There were also many conflicts between these people. Some of the people who stood with Jiang Zixi had joined because of hatred. Shirgan and Tong Lan took 7 to 8 boxes from Renbaqian. Other than 2 containing nuclear bombs, the rest were some protective devices. They met up with the people from the Department of Inspection. Tai Yan, the head of the Department of Inspection, led the team, but was only responsible for protecting the 2 of them. They took a train to Yujiang City and then took a tractor to Great Xia. After arriving in Great Xia, people from Jingtian sect met them and went to Huaping Sword Tower. The person who came was Su Jiaojiao, the Jade Face Fox from Jingtian sect. She had stayed in Lan City with Lin Dong for a period of time and had a good understanding of the main officials there. Although Tai Yan had a scowl on his face, she didn't mind and smiled sweetly instead. The Aboriginals were like this. They weren't afraid and would argue with anyone they met. At present, they only had a scowl on their face and didn't look for trouble the moment they met. Renbaqian had already warned them before they came. As the main person, Tong Lan also put on a proud posture. On the other hand, Shirgan was rather calm, unlike the Aboriginals. At first, Su Jiaojiao wanted to worm some information out of Shirgan. However, despite his young age, Shirgan handled matters calmly and didn't have any thoughts about Su Jiaojiao's beauty. He was completely unlike those inexperienced brats. After a few tries, Su Jiaojiao changed her target. However, it was unknown whether it was because they were incompatible or because beautiful women naturally viewed each other with hostility, but Su Jiaojiao and Tong Lan bickered and ridiculed each other from the beginning to the end. After a few times, Su Jiaojiao finally gave up and became a guide. She did not interact with anyone other than the journey. It took her a week to reach a Daoist temple outside of Heyuan City. She left Su Jiaojiao with Li Yuanzhu and entered the city to look for Lin Dong. Everyone has worked hard. Li Yuanzhu met Tai Yan, Shi Gan, and Tong Lan. The rest of the people from the Department of Inspection were taken away to rest. Tai Yan nodded slightly. He still had some respect for her. These days, they have tried to fight a few times. Although there weren't many casualties on both sides, they can't sit still anymore. Since you are here, let's make our move in 2 days. Zhao Prince Consort has already told us what to do, right? I know. Give them a chance first. If they persist in going about things the wrong way, let's set off fireworks. Tong Lan raised her small face. Even in front of Li Yuanzhu, she still maintained her proud posture and spoke in a slightly contemptuous voice. Li Yuanzhu chuckled and didn't care about Tong Lan's behavior at all. She was just a child, and her goal was to save as many people as possible. Then, she asked some other questions, which Shi Gan answered. Only then did Li Yuanzhu arrange for them to rest. That night, she invited the experts from Heiyuan City to discuss the matter again. In fact, there wasn't much to discuss. They were just putting on a show and surrounding those people at the Screen Sword Tower. After contacting each other through the radio station, everyone set off 2 days later and arrived outside the Screen Sword Tower at noon. This time, they didn't spread out. Instead, more than 70 experts gathered together with their disciples and nearly 1,000 people. More than 70 of the world's top experts gathered together. Although they couldn't change the dynasty, they could still bathe the capital of Great Xia in blood. Coupled with the experts from the Screen Sword Tower, it could be said that, except for a few people, all of the world's top experts were gathered here. Even the imperial court of Great Xia, which was retreating step by step, and the revolutionary army, which was taking advantage of their victory to pursue them, stopped at the same time and looked over. Not to mention the people from the Screen Sword Tower. More than 20 experts stood on the city wall and looked into the distance with solemn faces. Everyone knew that a war was coming. Chapter 1073. The people standing on the city wall knew that the other side had an overwhelming advantage in terms of strength. Other than Li Fu, who was ranked first, Qi Zixiao, and Hong Wu, who was ranked sixth, 6 out of the remaining 7 experts in the world were facing the other side. As for the top 100 experts, the other side had twice as many people as they did. However, they weren't ready to give up. Although this was not a war between races, nor was it a war of righteousness, everyone had their own beliefs in their hearts. It could be for freedom, hatred, justice, or other reasons. Although their starting points were different, those who could become the top experts in the world would definitely have their own beliefs and wouldn't be easily swayed. Moreover, the other side might not be a monolithic block. As long as they showed that they could cause a certain amount of casualties, the other side might not be willing to fight them head-on. Needless to say, they still had some tricks up their sleeves. Although they didn't have as many experts as the other side, it wasn't just the number of experts that would affect the outcome of the battle. Their joint attacks and the mechanisms in the city could also delay some of the experts and reduce some of the pressure. The people below didn't think so much and knew that they didn't need to make the first move. Some of them had seen the nuclear bomb, while others had never seen it but had heard of it. Most of them only knew that they had a killer weapon, but didn't know exactly what it was. Many people looked at the aboriginals in front of the crowd. These people had just arrived and wanted to attack, so the so-called killer weapon must have something to do with them. Qi Zixiao was the president, but he wasn't here. The second most powerful expert in the world, Li Yuanzhu, and the first most powerful expert in the world, Li Fu, were willing to be heroes. In that case, what could these aboriginals bring? This made people curious. It was said that it could destroy the world, but most people didn't believe it. Li Yuanzhu looked at the people on the city wall in the distance and didn't try to persuade them. It was useless to rely on words now. Only by showing them enough power to crush everything would they be able to calm down and reconsider what they were saying. How much longer? Li Yuanzhu's body was very straight, and she was holding an open scroll with the words, Diamond Sutra, written on it. She had obtained it from Zhao Prince Consort and had been reading it recently. The others were standing not far away from each other, and they looked like a plate of loose sand. However, it was impossible for them to stand neatly, and even Li Fu couldn't do it. Li Yuanzhu and the rest had already done their best to gather these people together. They're retreating. They haven't left the range yet. Tong Lan crossed her arms and calmly sized up her surroundings. Everyone here was a top-notch expert who could make a name for himself. In the face of other people's scrutinizing gazes, she did not feel uncomfortable at all. Although she had not reached their level, the thing in her hand could kill most of the people here. After another 15 minutes, Tai Yan returned with Shirgan. Let's begin. Li Yuanzhu turned around and nodded at her. Tong Lan curled her lips in displeasure. Although she could maintain a certain degree of bewilderment since he was the second in the world, she was not willing to be ordered around. But now was not the time to throw a tantrum. He got someone to open the boxes behind him and took out a pair of sunglasses and a white lab coat to distribute to everyone. As long as they didn't get too close to the core of the explosion and didn't linger there for too long, the radiation wouldn't cause too much harm to them. However, Renbaqian didn't say anything, so no one knew. They're starting. Jiang Zixi and the others, who were standing at the top of the city wall, raised their guard when they saw that there was finally movement from the opposite side. However, there was still a process before the fight began. The other party would come to persuade them to surrender and be rejected. Then, the fight would begin. If nothing went wrong, it would be like this. Unexpectedly, the other party didn't attack. Instead, they put on white clothes. What's the meaning of this? Probably to dress neatly. Ridiculous. Someone immediately sneered. Seeing that the other party had put on white clothes, everyone raised their guard again, thinking that the other party was going to send someone over. However, there was still no one. Just as everyone was pondering over this, there was a huge change on one side of the screen. 15 kilometers to the left of the screen, an intense light burst out, and a huge fireball suddenly appeared in the distance. This was followed by a deafening explosion and a huge storm. Not good. Everyone, who had just been attracted to the screen, was almost blinded by the light. One by one, they closed their eyes in shock. They had been hit. Everyone retreated one by one, raised their guard, and was wary of the other party's sneak attack. However, the huge sound waves, the vibrations in the air, and the sudden gust of wind made all their senses overwhelmed by the destructive power. They couldn't feel anything else. At this moment, the people who were being held back by them didn't have any intention of sneaking an attack. Instead, they stared at the violent scene in the distance through their sunglasses. Even Li Yuanzhu and the others, who had seen it twice, were amazed, let alone those who had never seen it before. Looking at the huge flame rising into the sky in the distance, the ring-shaped flame formed by the dust in the middle, and the flaming mushroom above, they felt the vibration under their feet and the sweeping gust of wind. All of them were shocked. Fear arose in more than one person's heart. None of them could say a word. This had completely transcended the power of a human. No one would doubt that this was an attack from a deity. Then, everyone was covered in a layer of dust from the shock wave. Phew! After a long time, someone finally gasped loudly. Just now, there was only shock left in everyone's hearts, so much so that they almost forgot to breathe. If it weren't for their strength, they would have suffocated to death. What is this? Someone asked subconsciously. Nuclear bomb. Tong Lan said proudly. Every time I see it, I'm shocked. It is indeed a power that doesn't belong to the human world, Lin Dong exclaimed. Li Yuanzhu nodded slightly. She could cross more than 10 meters with one step as if she was teleporting. Step by step, she walked toward the painting in the distance. Her movements weren't abrupt at all, as if it was supposed to be so. Jinrenli seems to be stronger. Ma Hongyu's eyes were filled with amazement. In the past, Li Yuanzhu might have been able to do it, but she couldn't do it so naturally. Unexpectedly, Jinrenli had improved a lot in the past 3 years. At this rate, it wouldn't take many years for him to reach Li Fu's level, right? Lin Yu followed behind Li Yuanzhu. Her mind was still blank, and she didn't know where her thoughts were drifting. Following Li Yuanzhu was already a habit. The chaos on the city wall didn't stop. Jiang Zixi couldn't care less. He forced his eyes open and stared into the distance. Although everyone was almost blinded by the dazzling light just now, they could still feel the earth-shattering power. Everyone, your resistance is meaningless. Li Yuanzhu landed lightly on the city wall without the slightest worry. What is this? Jiang Zixi asked bitterly. A nuclear bomb. Li Yuanzhu whispered. Since we can place one in the distance, we can also place one on the screen. What's the point of your resistance? Mobile reading access, M. Chapter 1074. Renbochin sat on a chair under the shade of a tree, enjoying half a day of leisure. Not far away was Two Flower, who was chopping at the air with a double-edged axe. The double-edged axe was snatched by Two Flower, and it was hard to believe that a double-edged axe would appear in a kindergarten. However, to the aboriginals, who had been determined to fight brainlessly since they were young, nothing was impossible. On the first day of kindergarten, Two Flower fought with the aboriginals. When they found out that their children had been beaten, many parents' first reaction was to give their children a weapon like a knife or an axe and tell them to fight back the next day. Even if Two Flower was a princess. From the second day onwards, there were children carrying weapons to the kindergarten every day. Ren Bachin was shocked. However, the parents of the aboriginals spoke eloquently. This was how the aboriginals educated their children. Although they had different positions, they were surprisingly consistent and barbaric when it came to educating their children. Fortunately, those boorish people knew what they were doing. Those weapons were either unsharpened metal or wooden weapons. The double-edged axe in Two Flower's hands was one of the spoils of war. Thanks to them, Two Flower now had new toys to play with every day. Two Flower had also become the tyrant of the kindergarten. Fighting against each other, fighting against each other, fighting against each other, fighting against each other, fighting against each other. This was a step-by-step process. Renbochin shifted his gaze away from Two Flower and welcomed the sunlight that shone through the shade of the tree, enjoying a rare break. Being a national leader was much more tiring than working. There were at least 2 days of rest after working. When was the last time he had a break? The Empress brought Qin Yuan and Hong Yuan over and sat beside Renbochin. Qin Yuan put down the tray in her hands. There were 2 cups of fruit juice. Hong Yuan was holding a jar of water in her hand. It was prepared for honeysuckle. She drank more water. The problem with Great Xia has been settled. Renbochin turned to the Empress and said. This was the news that came just now. The problem with the Huabing Sword Tower had been settled. Using nuclear bombs to convince people was reasonable and irrefutable. Jiang Zixi surrendered. More than half of the more than 20 masters and disciples of several sects surrendered. Except for 3 people, the rest were lone rangers without families or sects to drag them down. They fled the moment the situation turned bad. As a lone ranger, he was indeed a cut above the rest when it came to escaping. Yet, out of the three of them, they were only able to catch one. They will set off in a few days. After all, now that the top experts of Great Xia had been gathered together, it was time for the next step. I intend to hold the meeting in the capital, Ren Baqin said. The Empress's gaze didn't leave Lu Hua, but she heard what he said and said faintly, "You decide." She had never cared about these people. It was just that Ren Baqin felt that it was meaningful to do this, so she let him do whatever he wanted. The Empress changed the topic and asked, "You mentioned before that radiation might cause plants and animals to mutate and produce some monsters, right? Why did you suddenly mention this?" Ren Baqin had a bad premonition. Some monsters have appeared in the 60,000 mountains. Their strength is average, but they are very aggressive. The villages in the vicinity have suffered many casualties. The Protectorate of the South has already sent people to clear them out. Ren Baqin couldn't help but ask, "Are you sure it's caused by the radiation from the nuclear bomb?" In any case, it appeared nearby recently. Although he couldn't confirm it, he felt that it was very likely. The territory of Cardinal Heaven-level beasts was huge, and they rarely appeared in the outer and middle regions. 4 of them appeared near the nuclear bomb explosion, so it was likely that they had mutated due to radiation. Are they difficult to deal with? Since the Empress said that their strength was average, Ren Baqin reckoned that they weren't weak. Otherwise, the Empress wouldn't have mentioned this matter. At most, she would have asked someone to show him the details. So far, we have discovered 4 Cardinal Heaven-level beasts. 4 Cardinal Heaven-level beasts weren't considered much to the Aboriginals. However, his brother-in-law was still in the depths of the 60,000 mountains, and it would take at least 2 months for him to return to the outer regions. The forces of the Protectorate of the South and the outer regions were definitely no match for those beasts. What do those beasts look like? How intelligent are they? A spider, a snake, a green-eyed eagle, and a worm-like beast. At present, the Protectorate of the South doesn't have enough strength to test them. According to our observations, their intelligence is similar to that of a beast. The most important thing is that they have a certain community. Currently, that spider has occupied a valley near the area where the nuclear bomb was detonated. There are hundreds of spiders the size of wash basins. Although they aren't strong, they are very poisonous and hard to kill. To be able to develop such a large community, it should have been some time. Why did they only discover it now? Ren Baqin was puzzled. Previously, he had arranged for people to patrol the area because he was afraid that such a situation would occur. The Empress looked cold and didn't say a word. Ren Baqin could tell from her expression that someone had probably neglected their duty. Relocate the nearby villages that were affected, Ren Baqin said after some thought. The Empress had ordered many times, but not many villages were willing to relocate, especially those near the outer regions of the 60,000 mountains. This was an opportunity. "We can only do that for now," the Empress said as she sipped her juice. "In 1 month, they will be going to clear out the newly discovered villages anyway, so we can settle this while we are at it." After they finished talking about business, they sat there and watched Two Flowers play with her axe. The Empress couldn't stand Two Flowers' clumsiness and took the initiative to give her some pointers. Although the Empress was used to fighting empty-handed, at her level of strength, she could play with any weapon skillfully. It was enough for her to teach Two Flowers. Ren Baqin looked at the big and small pair with a smile on his face. Half a month later, the top experts, including Jiang Zixi and the others, took a train to Lan City and then took a truck to the capital. The Empress and Ren Baqin were already waiting for them there. The things they saw along the way amazed them. Trains, tractors, trucks, and some other messy things. The changes in Dayou surprised them. Compared to Great Xia, which had been at war for several years, Dayou was much more prosperous. When they arrived at the capital, there were high-rise buildings everywhere. The wide roads, pedestrian crossings, and neat green belts gave them a great shock. Even Great Xia couldn't compare to this place. It was hard to imagine that this was the capital of the barbarians. In comparison, Great Xia seemed more like the barbarians. However, the most attractive thing wasn't these, but the slogans hanging on the roadside. If you don't die from jumping off a building, the Public Order Department welcomes you. It's strictly forbidden to throw children from the second floor or above. If you want to get rich, have more children and plant less trees. Domestic violence is prohibited. If you can't avoid it, go to the arena. Beating children while eating, sleeping, and eating. Children, do I agree? Looking at these slogans, even those who had been to Lawn City before had a strange look on their faces. This was really full of the style of Zhao Prince Consort. Only Lin Dong had a look of admiration on his face and felt that this was a good idea. Even if most of them were illiterate, as long as someone repeated the things on these slogans every day, the content would be engraved in everyone's heart. Baidu search 081 Chinese network yen. No advertising slogans. Chapter 1075. Once one's strength reached a certain level, one would rarely be moved by external objects. However, after these top experts arrived in the capital, they still looked at everything with amazement and admiration. Wide roads, neat buildings, complete planning, high-rise buildings everywhere, shops with glass doors, and windows of all the buildings. The modern style of the city was extremely novel in this era and gave off a very grand vibe. There were also trucks and tractors all over the streets. This kind of new means of transportation, which couldn't be seen in Great Xia, could be seen everywhere here. The vehicles on the roads added a lot of vitality to the city. Everyone who saw this city had to admit that it was the most unique city in this world. They also saw a kind of vehicle that looked like a moving house in the city, going back and forth in the city. After asking around, they found out that this was a new kind of transportation in this city called the bus. There were currently a total of 4 routes going back and forth in this city. Based on the size of this city, an ordinary person would have to walk at least a day from one side to the other. This was also a common situation in large cities in this era. However, ordinary people could travel from one side to the other in 2 hours using this kind of transportation with very little money. Young master, this place is really magical. It's hard to imagine that this is the country of the barbarians. A young girl looked out of the window and said to a handsome man in amazement. Indeed. The man who was addressed as young master looked to be about 30 years old and was called young master Feng. His real age was slightly older than he looked, but he had achieved so much at this age. Although he couldn't compare to Li Yuanzhu, he was still a top-notch talent. That Zhao Prince Consort is really amazing. Young Master Feng praised as he patted his palm with his fan. I wonder what kind of people the Dayo Empress and Zhao Prince Consort are. I heard that they were the ones who started this organization. Do you want to know? Young Master Feng chuckled. Of course I do. These two are considered legends. The Empress ascended to the throne at a young age. In just a few years, she not only stabilized her position but also grasped power in the imperial court. She is also one of the top experts in the world. Most of the top 10 experts over the years were killed by her. It is said that Zhao Prince Consort isn't very strong, but he was able to gain a foothold in the imperial court of the barbarians. In just a few years, he changed Dayo's appearance and even annexed the Yun nation. One of them is a scholar, while the other is a martial artist. Both of them achieved greatness in such a short period of time. One is a martial artist, while the other is a schemer. Both of them are well known throughout the world. They can be said to be outstanding talents. I'm sure we will see them in a few days. Young Master Feng nodded slightly. The maid's words were exactly what he was thinking. In fact, he was more concerned about Zhao Prince Consort Renbaqian than Qi Zixiao. After all, that nuclear bomb was created by Renbaqian. He was also very curious about the princess who was born with the strength of a cardinal heaven expert. Today's Dao could be said to be beloved by the heavens and the earth. Some people were looking forward to it, but there were naturally others who had other thoughts. There were still 20 people in this group who had been convinced by the nuclear bomb and had no choice but to surrender. How could they not have any thoughts at this time? He arranged for everyone to stay in a villa area on the Third Ring Road. That night was the banquet for the new imperial palace. The area occupied by the new palace was 3 times that of the Lawn City's palace. However, before arriving at the new palace, everyone was attracted by the lights that lit up the entire city like stars hanging above their heads. I've long heard that Lawn City is a city that never sleeps. Although I haven't seen it, this place isn't bad at all. Many people exclaimed in admiration. This place is even more splendid than Lawn City. Someone who had been to Lawn City interrupted. Everyone could understand this. It was said that this city was a completely new capital, so it was to be expected that it was more splendid than Lawn City. The banquet didn't have any twists and turns. Everyone finally saw the Empress and the famous Zhao Prince Consort, whom they had often heard about from the experts who had come before. The Empress was similar to what everyone had imagined. On the other hand, Zhao Prince Consort looked like an aboriginal whose brain was full of muscles. It was hard to imagine that so many wonderful ideas came from his mind. In fact, the most attractive person was Dao's princess, Qi Yuqing, who was born with the strength of a Kismet heaven expert. It could be said that she had unprecedented talent and was the focus of everyone's attention. Just like the city, the banquet also amazed everyone. This time, Renbaqian didn't arrange any dark cuisine. Instead, he arranged classic dishes such as double-cooked pork, steamed eggplant with garlic sauce, and boiled fish. Even if everyone wasn't paying attention to the food, they couldn't help but take a few more bites and then couldn't stop eating. After the banquet ended, there wasn't much food left on the table in front of everyone. The next day, everyone rested. Many people chose to stroll around this new city, which was completely different from other cities, to see the scenery here. Young Master Feng visited some of the shops in the Yun Nation and a few of the imperial family stores, especially the imperial department store. It had a complete range of goods, including rice, vegetables, wine, meat, cloth, ready-made clothes, and other miscellaneous goods. This new type of department store was also quite eye-catching. There was also a bookstore. Young Master Feng and his maidservants lingered in it for a long time. Finally, he brought back a comic book called Naruto, which he was very interested in. He also brought back a book called Jade Meditation Cushion. Next was the real meeting, which was the most important thing. Previously, everyone had heard a little about the unrecorded history of the human race and the matters of the foreign races from the Go Home organization, but they didn't know much. When it was time for the meeting, everyone learned about the details from Renbaqian. The 5 emperors of the ancient human race, the war outside the 60,000 mountains, the expulsion of the human race, the desperate migration, the forced signing of the contract, the decline of the human race, when everything that had been buried by history was revealed by Renbaqian, except for some of the experts who knew the whole story, no one else could remain calm. In addition, everyone also received some more detailed information that Renbaqian had people sort out from the Temple of Heaven. However, Renbaqian didn't mention anything about the Temple of Heaven. In his mind, the Temple of Heaven and the Go Home organization were 2 different organizations. One was in the dark, while the other was in the light. In the future, the Temple of Heaven could be another force in the dark. After narrating the history, it was time to look forward to the future. The first thing to do was to introduce the multi-level marketing, which was the Organization Development Guide, to everyone. Among them, Blood Sea Demon and Li Yuanzhu were the pioneers in the first stage. Next, everyone had to do two things. The first was to eliminate the foreign races in the 60,000 mountains. The second was to expand the Go Home organization, absorb new blood, and nurture talented young disciples. Baidu search 881 Chinese network yen. No advertising words. Chapter 1076. Senior, I want you to lead the team to wipe out the outsiders this time. They had made sufficient preparations for the previous purge, but a top-notch expert had still died. Although there aren't many people in those villages, they aren't weak. Only Senior can lead us. I'm just a blacksmith. What team can I lead? I want to be the landlord. Li Fu looked at the cards in his hand, grabbed 3 cards from the ground, and hit a 7. There are other people who can assign tasks, but the leader has to be Senior. Other people can't suppress so many experts. Ren Baqian threw down a 3, followed by a dragon and 4 2s. It was a king's bomb. Li Fu's nose and eyes were in disarray. Don't you still have her? She's much more suitable than me. Li Fu angrily pushed 32 1 yuan coins to Ren Baqian and glanced at Li Yuanzhu, who was sitting nearby. I can't go. I have other things to do. Li Yuanzhu looked away from the book in her hand and nodded at Li Fu. I want to be the landlord. Ren Baqian looked at the king in his hand. There were 3 3s, 2 2s, 4 kings, and the remaining wads were still in Li Fu's hand. He really couldn't understand where Li Fu got the courage to be the landlord. I have something to do as well. I'm still waiting to teach my disciples. Li Fu squinted at him. She's still too young. Ren Baqian said as he looked at the cards. How is it small? You said that before. How long has it been? Li Fu's face was full of unhappiness. Part of it was because he had never been able to teach honeysuckle martial arts. Another part of it was because he had lost too badly. One had to know that Li Fu did not have much money. In the past, he had partnered with Ning Kaichen to sell the iron underpants. Now that Ning Kaichen had absconded with the money, the iron underpants business was no longer viable. Firstly, he had no power. Secondly, he had no financial resources. Thirdly, he did not commit any crimes. He could only rely on the school to pay him every month. Today, Ren Baqian had won back half of his monthly salary. The person in front of Li Sui was really a good-for-nothing. When you come back from the extermination of the outsiders, you can teach 2 flowers. She's also at the age to learn. Ren Baqian looked at Li Gaoqian's remaining coins and reckoned that the sweet potato thief was about to appear again. It was estimated that in the second half of the month, the school would be filled with the smell of roasted sweet potatoes. Hearing this, Li Fu's goal was considered to have been achieved, so he readily agreed. In fact, he also wanted to see the strength of those outsiders. Although Ren Baqian had captured some foreign races previously, they were extremely weak and were sent directly to the laboratory for research. It was about 8:00 in the evening. While Ren Baqian and the others were playing cards and discussing business, the other experts were either resting or strolling around the city. The mountain people who came to this city brought some things from the 60,000 mountains, which were very common to them. However, in the eyes of the aboriginals, it was a novelty. They could often exchange for things they needed from the Yun nation or the Jing tribe. As a result, a spontaneous night market had formed in the imperial capital in just a few months. There were many people in the night market. After all, most people had nothing to do at night. Many people brought their useless things to the night market to exchange for some necessities. Young Master Feng had just come out of the night market with his maidservant. The maidservant was carrying a lot of things, all of which were harvested from the night market. Not long after they walked out, they saw a group of people gathered there. At the same time, they could hear a single word or phrase coming from the crowd. There was no connection between them, which made them a little curious. After walking forward, they discovered that there was a huge white screen in front of the crowd. On the left side was the word 9, and on the right side was a pen that was slowly writing the word 9. 9, commonly used as a number, is written as. A woman's voice was heard throughout the crowd. Young Master Feng looked at what was displayed on the huge screen with a strange expression on his face. Young Master, are they in hell? The maidservant was also very surprised as she didn't expect to see such a scene here. Young Master Feng nodded slightly. He was very surprised by this scene. He had never seen such a thing in Great Xia. He didn't even think that they would actually teach illiterate people to read on the streets. Moreover, this language was completely different from the language of Great Xia. What was Xiao Prince Consort trying to do? Young Master Feng looked around the crowd and found that from time to time, someone in front of him was adjusting a box that projected light onto the white screen. Every time the box was adjusted, the image on the screen would be affected. The sound came from the two boxes next to the screen. The next day, young Master Feng looked for Rinpochen and asked him about this matter sincerely. He was very curious about Rinpochen's purpose. This was because no one had ever done such a thing before. This is because people learn faster after they become literate. Even if they don't have anyone to teach them, they can spontaneously learn some things and then serve the imperial court. At the same time, after learning, their abilities would also become stronger, and they would be able to do some things that only scholars could do. In fact, when they learn to read and write, they are already scholars. Does Your Highness need a lot of scholars? Although there aren't many aboriginals, the Yun nation uses a lot of them. If possible, I would prefer that everyone be literate so that they can do more things. If everyone can really be literate, then ordinary people can shine more brightly, and this world and this society will undergo changes that will surprise me. Young Master Feng was still a little puzzled. As the saying went, rulers wouldn't let the people know too much. However, here, Xiao Prince Consort was trying to get everyone to learn how to read. Every day, there were people who were responsible for explaining the content of the newspaper. Xiao Prince Consort's thinking and approach were completely different from the officials of other countries. Young Master Feng could vaguely guess what would happen, but he still had to wait for time to ferment and see with his own eyes if it was the same as what he thought. Just like what he and the maidservant had said before, Xiao Prince Consort could be considered an outstanding person. Young Master Feng believed that he could completely crush Xiao Prince Consort in terms of martial arts. However, in other aspects, he wasn't better than Xiao Prince Consort. It could even be said that Xiao Prince Consort was much more brilliant than him. Therefore, he wanted to see what kind of changes Rinpochen's actions would bring to this world. The meeting lasted for a week before the experts split into two groups. One group consisted of more than 70 people, including Li Fu, Jiang Zixi, Ma Hongyu, Su Gongso, and the others. They headed to the 60,000 mountains to join Qi Ziding in clearing out the villages of the foreign races. The other group consisted of Li Yuanzhu, Lin Dong, the Blood Fusion Ghost, Young Master Feng, and a few other experts from the Yun Nation. They would return to the Great Xia River and the Yun Nation to establish a talent selection network. Needless to say, Li Yuanzhu was a world-renowned expert with a calm and gentle personality. She was the most suitable person for this task. Lin Dong was the leader of a cult and was very knowledgeable in many aspects. He was also adept at bewitching people. The Blood Fusion Ghost was an active member of the organization. Young Master Feng wasn't considered very strong and was, of course, only among these people. However, he was very interesting. He had friends all over the world, from peddlers and pawns to top experts. At least 1/3 of this group of people had dealt with him before. In addition, there were a few top experts from the Yun Nation, and they were the first to join the organization. After all, even the Yun Nation had been destroyed by Dayo. Their roots were in the Yun Nation, so how could they say no? These people could establish a preliminary network in Great Xia and the Yun Nation to tap talented young people. The organization would provide them with a certain amount of resources to train them, and it would depend on their luck as to how far they could go in the end. Even though it was much easier to practice martial arts in this world than on Earth, it was still extremely difficult to be called an expert. Great Xia and the Yun Nation had a population of 400 to 500 million, but there were only 50 to 60 spirit wool experts who had condensed heaven-grade weapons. Talent, resources, luck, and temperament were all indispensable. Only those who possessed these would be able to shine brightly in the future. Of course, the others were not completely useless. According to Rinpoche's plan, these people would be the main force to restrain the foreign races in the future. Mobile Reading Access, you're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.